You know, I was sitting with my wife one day watching junk TV when I suddenly decided I'm going to marathon review the Ghibli films, and then everyone else in the library promptly told me to shut up and take my laptop somewhere else. Studio Ghibli's work has always been a standout in the anime industry, largely a result of ignoring trends that make anime hard for zealots to recommend to people who regularly shower, but also because for the vast majority of its existence, the studio has been run by two auteur directors who have a very distinct vision for the kind of art they want to make. In recent years, as a result of the death of master animator Isao Takahata and the ailing health of Hayao Miyazaki, the studio has been in something of a holding pattern where its future is uncertain. I think for a lot of people there's a fear that after Miyazaki's death, the studio will transform into making placid-faced films that no longer immediately convey to people that this is something different. Compared to that, closure would probably be better. So before we get started with the actual reviews, let me just run down how my grading system works. I grade things on a letter grading system with a star and skull on either end. A star means that a piece of art is functionally perfect, while a skull means that it's harmful. What does harmful mean? Well, that either means right-wing propaganda, so objectionable that nobody would ever think to defend it, or it is just so unbelievably bad that experiencing it will give you a migraine. This does not apply to things that give actual literal migraines, by the way. Anything C- or a higher is considered a good grade. If you claim B- as a low score, I'm going to hit you with a stick. For a film to get a star grade, it has to have a core central theme, and one that's more specific than the power of friendship, or believing in yourself, or coming of age. A film that is otherwise amazingly made but doesn't have one never goes higher than an A+. And while this isn't relevant to the video as no such Ghibli film exists, any story that makes a villain out of civil rights activists never goes higher than F regardless of quality. Spoilers for this video, only 2 Ghibli films go lower than a C. So with that out of the way, let's get right into it. First up is Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. Nausicaa, The Valley of the Wind isn't technically a Ghibli film. It was made by Topcraft just before it went out of business. In fact, Topcraft eventually split into 3 different companies: Studio Ghibli, Pacific Animation, which made The Real Adventures of Johnny Quest, Silverhawks, and Thundercats, and Gainax, which made... no comment. Anyway, for whatever reason, probably rule of we got the director, so neener, Ghibli's the one that got to keep the rights to Nausicaa, and so it's forever known as a Ghibli movie. And like most of Miyazaki's work, it's really insistent that you know that nature is good and war is bad, and if you fail to live in harmony with nature, it will kill you and your family and your cat and that windmill for good measure. In the world of Nausicaa, humanity is suffering a post-apocalypse where much of the world is covered in a poisonous forest. The people of the Valley of the Wind live sheltered from the toxic jungle by virtue of living upwind of it, and have cultivated a life around living in harmony with the land and accepting the toxic jungles are just something everyone's gonna have to get used to. The titular Nausicaa is the princess of the valley and loves spending all of her time in the toxic jungle, and has mastered the art of communing with nature when she saves fantasy Patrick Stewart from a giant potato bug. But then the Valley of the Wind gets invaded by the Tolmekians, who have been transporting some big weapon thing to use against their enemies, the Pedjite, and thus the Valley of the Wind ends up being caught in a crossfire of a race war. Let's see, 2 nations fighting each other for imperialistic reasons, the innocent people caught in the crossfire, and a big giant weapon that is known to have caused a global apocalypse and changed the environment to be poisonous to humanity. Be honest, is this about nukes? Because I'm starting to think this might be about nukes. Nausicaa's approach to environmentalism is actually quite interesting, as it laser focuses on the fact that damage to the environment is itself an own goal. While in real life, rising temperatures and nuclear fallout make areas hostile for humans to live in Nausicaa, the threat is far more direct. The toxic jungle isn't just a place with poison in it. Clean water is actually being filtered through fossilized trees deep underneath it, and the jungle is crawling with insects who swarm at any hostility from humans. New World humans keep trying to burn down the toxic jungle to remove the threat it poses, but whenever they do, the largest of these insects, the Ohm, go, we hear you, but consider the following, and then swarm and destroy everything in their path until they die of exhaustion, and the toxic jungle expands from their corpses. So any attempt to cause harm to nature causes nature to bite back with violent gusto. In terms of environmentalist messages, it's pretty on the nose of literally having nature pimp slap humanity every time it starts thinking of industrializing again. But not if you listen to Nausicaa, stop fighting, and pet the potato bug, which means learn to get along with nature, you fuck! In particular, it makes a point about nature that is ugly. We all love to save the environment when it's a pretty forest you can imagine setting up a cottagecore lifestyle in, filled with rabbits and birds and deer and cute widow elephants. We all know those are important to save because we like them and they're aesthetically pleasing. But you know what's also important? Mosquitoes, wasps, big deadly spiders that will murder you if they so much as look at you, wolves that snarl and are probably bigger than you, ugly, gross, and disgusting insects that don't exist for your aesthetic pleasure, gross, moldy fungi. The toxic jungle everyone fears so much is actually producing clean air and drinkable water, so So the thing you believe is a blight on the world because it actively repels you is actually extremely beneficial for everyone. Gee, I wonder why the jungle is populated entirely by insects. There's a particular love of the ugliness of nature, the way a baby ohm is cared for and loved just as much as a fluffy bunny or a moose would be. And they do more good for the world than the people who think they're doing good by eradicating them. More importantly, it's angry. It is angry at men's indifference and unwillingness to understand nature. The Ohm are unmarketable and ugly. You couldn't make a plushie out of them, and the ecosystem they create is almost tailor-made to keep human beings out for their own good. The human tendency toward destruction and reckless conquest is represented in these massive hulking monsters that literally drip gore and look like horrifying nightmare creatures, to visually represent the kind of depravity it takes for a species to destroy the very ecosystem it relies on. No other species does this, and in the world of Nausicaa, the planet has evolved for this. Human beings are no longer the ultimate apex predator. If you start trying to kill nature, nature will kill you back and it will win. Nausicaa is a difficult film to talk at length about because it only has one thing to say, but it says it extremely well. There's a point at the end where the Ohm are swarming and are about to wash over everyone when Obaba flat out says that if extinction is to be their fate, then so be it. That if humanity needs horrible monsters like the old warriors to survive, then they've long since lost the right to exist, which coming from anyone else would sound eco-fascist, but here it's more of a resigned acceptance of the fact that the big bugs are about to kill them all until Nausicaa risks her own life to stop the swarm. If we don't take care of the environment, it will kill us. It's a guarantee. That's the kind of film that might sound preachy to some people, but important messages will always seem preachy to people who are out of touch with reality. This will be us one day, but probably without the big lovable potato bug, knowing the real world it'll just be a giant wandering spider.
We heard the humming like thunder. We saw the cloud rise at dawn. Then came the rain as we watched and prayed in vain. Then all was still, all was gone.
Castle in the Sky is certainly on a much slower boil than Nausicaa. It's about an hour into the film before we learn the two lead characters' names, Patsu and Shida. They meet when Shida falls off an airship and literally lands in his arms. She fell off the airship while trying to hide from, based on the context, I'm assuming pirates? They were after the necklace she wore, so yeah, I'm saying pirates. While she's down in Patsu's town, she learns about a floating castle in the sky. Patsu has been planning to find it after his father saw it one time and died trying to find it again. Loser. Then they get chased by pirates and have to escape the town, and thus does the real Castle in the Sky begin. They learn that the crystal Shida is wearing is made of Ethereum, a powerful material that humanity lost the ability to mine and work with, and that it comes from the floating castle, and Shida inherited a traditional name that roughly translates to the fucking chosen one, you dolt. They eventually get kidnapped by the government, and Mark Hamill reveals that the government also wants a floating city, because that would be a really sick way to carpet bomb South American nations when they start suggesting workers unionize. Shida strikes a deal to spare Patsu, but after being told that the government is not going to let Shida live, Patsu teams up with the pirates to rescue her. This is probably the most 80s anime ever made. Everything about it, visually, musically, and narratively, has the feel of a movie you'd have found on like Channel 88 when you were 9, watched like 40 minutes of, and then never been able to find again until 30 years later on the Tip of My Tongue subreddit. There's an action scene near the start where they fend off the pirates using their environment and a lot of slapstick. If this were made today, there would be a lot of luxuriously animated martial arts and screaming. It's very swashbuckly. Anime's not swashbuckly anymore, and that's a problem. The entire film is probably the most indirectly thematic. The main villain is the government trying to exploit and plunder a culture and civilization it sees as ripe for the taking, you know, like Atlantis, or El Dorado, or Africa. But that's largely where the commentary ends once the film becomes a race between all the characters to reach the castle first. The government gets overthrown. No, not in general, just from its role in the story. Aww. By Mark Hamill, who wants to use the castle to take over the world, and the heroes resolve to use an evil spell to destroy the castle and keep it and its technology from being used like this. Much of the story is about how while Shita may want to let the castle stay undiscovered, she has to find it anyway because the military is looking for it, and letting something that powerful fall into the hands of the army is not a workable solution to the fact that she's scared of that kind of power. Like most of Miyazaki's films, there's a stark divide between the lead characters, who almost never seek violence themselves, compared to the villains who who are so in favor of violence they eat a box of Violentos for breakfast. This comes from Miyazaki himself being a staunch pacifist, and his leads are often either unwilling to commit violence or incapable of doing so. Except for The Wind Rises, where the lead is apathetic to the violence his creations will commit. This is a fine theme, but on the surface level of the story, it tends to mean his lead characters, who are very often women, are ineffectual wet blankets who the story happens at, rather than having enough agency to direct the story on their own. Nausicaa was this for half of her film, but Sheeta is entirely at the whims of other characters around her. It's often Patsu who has to move the plot forward on their end. This is less egregious than it is in Nausicaa, where the character who does move the plot forward doesn't get introduced until halfway through. Funnily enough, the actual castle in the sky is a very small part of the film. It's largely the subject of myths and tales about its supposed technology and the advanced heavenly super people who once inhabited it. This is a far cry from the original castle seen in Gulliver's Travels, a kingdom that has made many advancements in astronomy, science, and math, but whose people are insufferably stupid in spite of that. It was a very thinly veiled satire of the United Kingdom. Once they actually make it to the castle, it's just about Mark Hamill monologuing to Sheeta about birthrights and power and imperialism while Sheeta waits for Patsu to show up with a gun and move the plot forward. I can't remember who originally said it, but there's an old piece of writing advice that goes, when in doubt, have someone walk in with a gun. Genuinely, Castle in the Sky is too long. People have said other Ghibli films are too long, and let's be honest, most of them are, but the ones people single out tend to be ones where the length is actually required to really immerse the viewer in the central theme. Castle in the Sky is an 80-minute adventure movie about finding the lost city stretched out to 2 hours, and at least one of those hours is spent on the characters hesitating. It's a movie I was really liking for the first third, was feeling lukewarm on the second third, and by the final third I just wanted it to be over. Even now, I just want this segment to be over. Wait a minute, I'm writing the fucking video, I can just—
Been trapped in that ship for an awful long time, so perhaps you have simply forgot what you signed. Oh, honestly, did you not read the colony policy that defined you as company property?
Okay, here we go, Grave of the Fireflies. So, Grave of the Fireflies is a deeply undeserved reputation as this kind of psychological torture film. Most people are unwilling to watch it because it's just brutal, unforgiving sadness at times. And even people who have seen it will usually only see it once and then never again. If you're one of the few people who list Grave of the Fireflies as your favorite Ghibli film, people will think there's something wrong with you. It's weird that we're in an era where some people are priding themselves on how they love all kinds of fucked up dark media, but ask them to watch a film that's sad and it's like you just asked them to rip out their own teeth. Well, funnily enough, I already know why that is. Unlike the kind of dark films or books that most people champion, Grave of the Fireflies actually has teeth. Grave of the Fireflies is about two children, Seita and Setsuko, who are orphaned during the waning days of World War II. They end up forced to live with their aunt, who bemoans the fact that Seita doesn't work to earn his keep, and instead stays home to take care of his sister. After enough of the poor treatment from their aunt, Seita decides to take Setsuko to live on their own, figuring they only have to rough it until their father returns. Over the course of the film, the two scrape and scrounge to get enough to eat and make a home in an abandoned bomb shelter. Unfortunately, Seita isn't able to get enough for Setsuko to eat, and she eventually starves to death, it having been revealed earlier in the film that Seita died soon after. The film covers a lot of different themes, with Takahata himself highlighting the issue of pride. Seita's pride ultimately ends up being the final nail in Setsuko's coffin. At one point, a farmer signals the theme of the film by literally telling Seita to swallow his pride and return to his shitty aunt because, while she may be terrible, it's better than starving out in the wilderness. Seita never takes this option, trying to still take care of Setsuko himself, something he ultimately fails to do. Despite how much the film manages to make you care about Seita and Setsuko, there's a profound apathy toward death all over the film. At the very start of the film, people are walking around Seita's corpse with the level of disgust you'd hold for a dead cockroach, and the bodies of other children are strewn about the place, lying there under the indifference of everyone around them. The fruit drop tin, which we later learn is filled with some of Setsuko's ashes, just gets thrown away like it's garbage. And even later in the film, Seita just casually pulls Setsuko away from a corpse like it's not even worth acknowledging. All over the place, people who could help them choose not to, too indifferent to their suffering to bother. And it's not hard to see why, because people are dying all over the place. Seita and Setsuko may be the main characters, but they aren't uniquely special in that regard. I think what makes Grave of the Fireflies so viscerally and dreadfully uncomfortable for many is that it's a film that deprives the viewer of the things that give them comfortable catharsis. A happy ending is not guaranteed. In fact, the film opens telling you that there won't be a good resolution for these characters. There isn't a main antagonist to root against and a hero to root for, because every character, no matter how small their role, has a hand in the deaths of these children, including one of those children. The only truly innocent character in the film is Setsuko. There's a lot of attention put on the terrible systems these children are living in, how it's uncaring toward their suffering, but you're denied the possibility of escaping or leaving it. Trying to exist outside the broken, cold, callous system is ultimately what dooms them. There's nothing especially noteworthy about our main characters. Many people are suffering, even other children are suffering just as much as they are. They aren't the main characters because they're important, and they're interchangeable with anyone. Any moment where another film would offer you a moment of emotional respite or a moment of catharsis is summarily denied, and you are forced to sit there and think about what you're watching. Grave of the Fireflies is so uncomfortable for so many people, specifically because it's too good at focusing on what it wants to be about that you can't just ignore it and focus on something else. Even The Tale of Princess Kaguya, a film that is arguably more depressing than Grave of the Fireflies, still warms the audience up with the entire first act of the film, and hides Kaguya's ultimate fate behind visual metaphor. Thinly veiled visual metaphor, but still just enough that a veneer can pretend they're not watching a young girl kill herself out of sheer lifeless despair. Grave of the Fireflies is raw and unfiltered, and at no point is the viewer ever given a break from thinking about the things that Takahata wants you to think about. This isn't something audiences, especially modern audiences, are accustomed to. Films, especially animated films, constrain themselves to a set of unspoken rules, and when a lot of media gets dark or grim, it does so in a very toothless ways that doesn't ask the audience to take off their warm blanket. Almost every rule about good storytelling is one Grave of the Fireflies breaks, and it does so because following those rules would have made the film easier to watch, but worse. A lot of people don't like thinking about anything when they sit down to watch a movie, so Grave of the Fireflies is a particularly potent pain point because not only does it force you to do that, it especially highlights how the apathy and indifference of the other characters is mirrored by you watching these children slowly dying. Of course, it's not going to be entertaining in the traditional sense, because why would watching children die ever be entertaining? It's actually not hard to think of the kind of person who would love this movie, and that's someone who likes films that make them think, someone who loves films with a core central theme, and that delivers that theme well regardless of how sad it is. It's me, I'm someone.
But her dreams give her wings, and she flies to a place where she's loved. Concrete angel.
My Neighbor Totoro is probably Ghibli's strangest film, which is ironic considering it's all over Ghibli's branding. Until Ponyo came out, it was the lightest and softest of their work. My Neighbor Totoro is about two sisters who move into an old house in the countryside to be close to their mother's hospital, where she's being treated for a chronic illness. The house, as it turns out, is practically infested with mold. I mean spirits. Those are definitely spirits. It's not mold, they're spirits. This leads them on an adventure to find out what they are, which eventually leads them to a big tree where they meet Gabriel Iglesias, who occasionally shows up whenever the plot is getting a touch too quiet. The entire film is practically a highlight reel of the almost nonsensical childhood adventures that children can get up to in a rural area. For the Zoomers in the audience, before the advent of computers you can hold in your hand, we used to do this crazy thing called going outside, where we'd have adventures finding every hidden path, shortcut, and meadow that our neighborhood had to offer. It's not something Zoomers or Gen Alpha really do, partially because they've got a literal dopamine generator in the palm of their hands, but also because their parents are overprotective freaks in nature who wouldn't let them out unsupervised until they were 16. Man, Gen X really just ruined childhood, huh? Much of the film is about the two sisters just exploring, experiencing life, bonding with furry creatures, and occasionally writing to their mother. There's little in the way of plot or conflict. Actually, no, there is. I mentioned that their mother is in the hospital with a chronic illness. Well, toward the end of the film, after all of this whimsy is getting to the point that it's about to cause a case of diabetes, this really starts to come to a head, as there's the very real possibility that these girls might lose their mother. Oh, and bear in mind, when it first came out, this movie was a double feature with Grave of the Fireflies, so the idea that a Ghibli film would not make two children lose their mother because that's too dark had been thoroughly shattered an hour and a half ago. Seriously, these two were a double feature? Holy shit! Satsuki breaks down in tears over it more than once, and she and Mei actually fight about it at one point. It's not especially present in the film, as I suspect their father isn't keeping them completely informed. It's not the plot that the film is building toward, but rather just the dash of salt that's necessary for any cake. And that's really it. Like, that's all I have. I don't have anything else. That's it. It's fucking Totoro. Like, there's no secret meaning or hidden truth or any of that shit fandom likes to cook up. The mother doesn't even die. She comes home at the end happily ever after. I genuinely have nothing else to say, and there's more films like that to come, too.
At Whimsy's house.
At Whimsy's house. At Whimsy's house. At Whimsy's house. At Whimsy's house.
Kiki's Delivery Service is one of 4 Ghibli films that are untouchable sacred cows. If you ask someone their favorite Ghibli film, they'll either say this, Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle, or Princess Mononoke. In fact, I put out a poll on social media for people to name their favorite Ghibli films, and those 4 were all near the top. Oh, also Ponyo. This puts me in a very uncomfortable position because, okay, I don't think these films are bad, they're just outclassed, you might say. Having watched every Ghibli film for this video and finding what I believe are some of the best animated films ever made, it has started to annoy me that these 4 get all the fanfare. Anyway, Kiki's Delivery Service is about Kiki, a 13-year-old witch who, following the customs of witches, I guess, has to leave home to begin her training. That training being finding a place to settle down and getting a job, apparently. Kiki comes to live at a bakery and ends up becoming a DoorDash driver, and throughout the film has to deal with managing a proper work-life balance, even at one point experiencing burnout and losing her ability to fly or talk to her familiar. And that's it. That's all Kiki's Delivery Service is. This is going to be a recurring problem, especially with Miyazaki's films, is that there is very little to discuss. They are not especially deep films, nor are they trying to be. In my grading system, most of Miyazaki's films straight up aren't allowed to gain a star rank because you have to have a core central theme beyond the list of general themes. Only 4 films in this video have star grades, and only one of them is a Miyazaki film. Kiki's Delivery Service is what's called a coming-of-age film, and I've never really cared for coming-of-age stories. That's because you're 30, CD. No, I didn't like these when I was a teenager either. I will fully confess I'm not in a position to appreciate this movie. It's a coming-of-age story, and I didn't have the kind of adolescence to appreciate that. It covers artist block and burnout, and I'm not really someone who grinds hard enough to experience burnout. And it's one of the more lighthearted and fantastical Ghibli films, and I tend to prefer the more grounded and melancholy Ghibli films. Nevertheless, this was Ghibli's big hit overseas. I mean, it's the film that practically broke them into the Western market. Were it not for Spirited Away, this would probably very frequently top most of the best of lists for Ghibli films. I used to say that someone's favorite Ghibli film says a lot about their taste in films and stories in general, but in recent years I've actually found most people have only seen about 5 of them, and it's usually the ones they saw as a kid. And most people aren't even aware Ghibli even has other films, or even other directors. The most they know of is Grave of the Fireflies, and that's just by its undeserved reputation as some kind of sadistic endurance test. But I found to people who have seen all of them, Kiki tends to rank lower. Not because it's bad, it's just outclassed.
Postman Pat, Postman Pat, Postman Pat, and his black and white cat. Early in the morning, just as day is dawning, he picks up all the post bags in his van.
Only Yesterday is my favorite Ghibli film. I wouldn't call it the best, it's a close second though, but it is my favorite. Only Yesterday is the second film directed by Isao Takahata and follows the life of Taiko, a woman who gets a 10-day vacation from work to take a trip out to the countryside. While she's on this vacation, she spends a lot of time reflecting on her childhood growing up in 1960s Tokyo. Taiko has a love of the countryside and spends her vacation time on a farm helping out. Given that she lives in the city and works a stifling and suffocating office job, getting out into fresh air and physical work would certainly sound like a vacation. The film focuses a lot on the mundane frustrations of a young girl growing up in a very stifling and suffocating environment, not unfamiliar to anyone who grew up in the 1960s in Japan, or America, or the UK, or Canada, or France. There's a particular moment that showcases the entire film in microcosm, where Taiko and her family get very excited at the prospect of getting to try pineapple, but when they finally figure out how to cut it and serve it, they realize that pineapple doesn't taste as good as they thought it would. It's rather extended and drawn out to capture the disappointment of something you were excited for turning out to be a letdown. Also, is that a table with blankets attached to it? That's fucking genius! Another scene later shows Taiko being very proud of herself for writing a really good essay in school, only for her mother to bemoan that she didn't eat her lunch, wishing she was a girl who did what she was told rather than make academic achievement. Wow, fuck you too, lady. It's a very subtle form of childhood misogyny, downplaying the things a girl does while pressuring her to conform to what a good girl should be. It's not lost on Taiko either, as she can see how quickly her mother's pride in her vanishes the instant she does something that isn't her fault. Yet this remark about her being a picky eater comes after the scene where she is excited to try new foods and then keeps eating it even after discovering she doesn't like it, shows a certain kind of parental splitting. Moments like this are all over the film as Taiko deals with a string of unfortunate disappointments, microaggressions, and bullying. Compared to something like Grave of the Fireflies or Princess Kaguya, Taiko's troubles seem small and unimportant. At one point in the story, a character tries to shame people for not finishing their lunch by invoking the starving children in starving children in Vietnam argument. This is one of those things that is really interesting in retrospect because at the time of writing, Every first world nation, including Japan and the US, is facing an epidemic of depression and unhappiness from rising income inequality and overwork, and these constant, unending, mundane frustrations contribute to that in a form of death by 1,000 cuts. But it's always something that doesn't get talked about because people always point to bigger, more critical, immediate problems to shame people against complaining. But I've often found it's people who don't have any troubles in life that do the most shaming. Hell, I had a viciously horrific childhood, far worse than Taiko, and I'm on the edge of my seat thinking, oh no, this poor baby, when she gets her adolescent love life sabotaged. Often a big problem with life in general is that it's just sort of mundanely shitty. Most people don't have big traumatic events that define their life. Most people just go through life slowly and systematically having their passions smothered and pushed into what they should do versus what they want to do, and that just leads to what's often called a tolerable level of permanent unhappiness. As an adult, Taiko is reflecting on all of this, laughing at the silly things and mulling over the things that stood out as especially miserable. It's the first time she's really had to sit and think about her experiences as a child. It's focused on 5th grade, and she even wonders why it stands out to her. The conclusion the film comes to is that it's the transitionary period of her life. This is highlighted in the scene where Taiko attends sex education and learns about periods. The boys are sent to go play baseball while the girls are taking this lesson. Now, even in the present day, there comes a problem of men just not understanding how menstruation works or being grossed out by it. It's not something I have a lot of experience with because when I was in school, we all took the same sex ed lessons. Hell, I grew up with a girl who overshared like crazy, so periods are practically rubbed in my face. You mean figuratively, right, CD? Sure. Anyway, since they were excluded from this lesson, the boys all find out about it secondhand and think some mysterious malady has taken place and proceed to mock and bully the girls over it. Can't properly teach the boys about women's bodies. I mean, they might empathize with them too hard, and that would just be the death of patriarchal society. Ironically, the girls treat the boys' behavior, which escalates to straight-up sexual harassment, as if it's an act of God that's pointless to question. So the ire is directed toward the girl who told them how this works in the first place. They don't question the boys, but they shame the lone girl for what is perceived as disturbing the peace. This is another microcosm of the film in that patriarchy only actually has power when women conform to it. Almost every gain from women's rights has been won the instant women stop conforming to what is expected of them and start demanding better. Patriarchy often pressures women to stay home and mind the house, but if you just don't, then it doesn't really have a recourse. That's why there's so much pressure on girls early on to behave and not rock the boat, because they know this. One of the reasons Taiko loves the countryside so much is that it's often more easygoing. Life is different out there than it is in the city. This is often the case everywhere. The culture or customs of a given region can often be wildly different depending on where you are in that region. Oftentimes, the biggest city of a given country can act like its own isolated nation all on its own. Look at her, she's so happy and bright when she gets out to the farm. She is in her fucking element. There's a moment where she's watching a girl beg her mother for new shoes to fit in that flashes back to a similar argument regarding a purse. Taiko mostly gets hand-me-downs from her sisters, fostering resentment in her for getting everyone else's garbage, and her sisters for having to give away things that are sentimental to them. Now in this moment, Taiko is being unquestionably whiny, but her sister is also just being an unrelenting bitch. Taiko is very obviously whining because she thinks it'll get her way, to the point she refuses to go on an outing over it, but when they call her bluff, she chases after them. However, walking outside without shoes on seems to be the point that her father finally wakes up because he cracks her across the face over, "Fucking hell, my dude, what is your damage?" Ugh, CD, you can't be judgmental about that. Huh? What are you talking about? Well, of course that doesn't make sense from a Western perspective. Oh, god damn it. In 1960s Tokyo, this was very serious misbehavior. Okay, Pixie, that's a problem for two reasons. One, the film very clearly presents this as an objective negative. His other daughter and his wife are both mortified, and he hangs his head in shame at losing his temper with her. And he's right to feel ashamed of himself for striking a child. And as stated by Taiko, this is the only time she was ever hit, indicating that he sincerely regrets his actions. Number two, back in the 60s, North American parents would also strike their children for really stupid, petty reasons that don't hold up to scrutiny. Parents hitting their children out of anger is a universal evil. This isn't just a skit for the sake of making fun of Pixie either. I've had this exact same conversation with 3 different people. It's just something weebs do, often rushing to defend Japan from perceived criticism, even when that criticism is coming from inside the house. It's also just really weird having to have these conversations regarding Takahata's films, no less, which are often scathingly critical of this kind of patriarchal chauvinism. Like, you know that, right? You know corporal punishment as a form of discipline is a patriarchal concept. I'm bigger, meaner, and uglier than you are, and if you don't behave, I will hurt you, is textbook insecure machismo. This isn't news. Bells should be ringing. People have tried to defend hitting kids as a form of discipline, but the truth is that it isn't rational. This is how it's portrayed with Taiko's father. He's getting increasingly annoyed with her whining and moaning, and then when the straw breaks the camel's back, he just lashes out. It's not even about the shoes, really. You can see that in the way he just stands there in shame. He's ashamed of himself for what he has done. This prioritizing of the parents' emotions over the well-being of their child is reinforced in the very next scene, where Taiko is reflecting on a bad test. Rather than just seeing that her child is struggling and needs help, her mother just sits there, silently sulking over the fact that her daughter has embarrassed her. This is something mediocre parents have been doing since the dawn of time. If your child randomly shows up with a bad grade, then that usually means they're struggling with the material and need help, or something else is going on that is taking their time and attention away from school. But resolving those things are hard and take work, and getting on your child's case for not applying themselves is the easier, faster, lazier option. It shunts the responsibility of parenting onto the child themselves, or in the case of Taiko's mother, she shunts it onto Taiko's sister. And later on, when Taiko still doesn't get it, they're just shit-talking her and whining about all her perceived moral failings, because it's easier. There's been some discourse about Taiko being neurodivergent, but even that is just falling into the same trap. Blaming neurodivergence because it's a convenient excuse to throw up your hands and say, not my problem. If she was neurodivergent, those two things are still the only real solution, and you're avoiding them. You can see how Taiko is learning from her parents and sisters to abandon things when they get hard. She throws up her hands about learning fractions and says, well, I don't get it, so nyeh. In the end, the reason Taiko is reflecting on her childhood is because this vacation out to the farm is her living a childhood fantasy about going to the countryside. When the family she's staying with starts talking about her staying permanently, Taiko flees and reflects on how she's really just playing pretend. She's not struggling with the harsh realities of living out here in the countryside, like the people who actually live there. It's yet another instance of being talked about as if she isn't there, something her family did to her, something she has done to others. Her last reflection is about a boy she hated and held in contempt, and yet she did so silently and behind his back. The end result was that this boy went out of his way to try and impress her, something she never picked up on. After an entire film of Taiko reflecting on the people who hurt her, she has to reflect on how she was that same influence in someone else's story. Someone else whose story we will never truly get to see. Taiko is reflecting on her childhood in Tokyo and romanticizing the countryside as this peaceful, idyllic life, but those people are living their own lives too. Hell, she's prompted on one of her flashbacks by seeing a young girl who is just the same as she was. It brings to mind that we can never truly know what someone is like or what they're struggling with just by viewing them from the outside. I found myself getting completely absorbed in Taiko's struggles throughout the film. Every time her parents stomped on another passion, every time her sister sabotaged her, every time Taiko thought back to a childhood memory that she still to this day does not have an explanation for, I was on the edge of my seat. Only Yesterday is an unusual film because it doesn't have a grander theme other than that life sucks. It follows the life of a not especially interesting woman reflecting on the mundane frustrations of her mundane childhood. If you showed this to someone whose favorite Ghibli film was Princess Mononoke, they'd probably be confused as to why it's supposed to be good. But what I think stands out about it is that Taiko doesn't need to be special to be worth telling a story about. She doesn't need to go on a grand adventure or suffer in war or beat cops to death with her reproductive organs or be a child grooming victim from the moon to have her story told. Reminds me of the painting of The Lace Maker, Johannes Vermeer painting a girl just making lace, an ordinary woman doing an ordinary job, but being worth painting regardless. Only Yesterday has been my favorite Ghibli film for almost a decade, but the last 2 years have made it especially resident with me. I recently reacquired an old journal that I had kept between 2006 and 2011, documenting some of the worst things to ever happen to me. And in rereading it, it feels like being reintroduced to myself, a version of myself that I've thrown no shortage of scorn onto, trying as hard as he can to cope with things that no 14-year-old should be asked to cope with. And it's in rereading this journal, and even rewatching this film, that I realize maybe my 14-year-old self doesn't need another person to tell him he's not trying hard enough. Maybe what he needs is just someone to help clean the cuts on his back.
Good girl in a straw hat with her arms out in a cornfield. That is a scarecrow. Thought it was a human woman. Sorry. A cold night, a cold beer, a cold jeans. Strike that last one.
Porco Rosso is Casablanca meets Top Gun meets Laserpig. Now, if you're a connoisseur of film, that sounds like the worst idea in the world. And it is. If someone pitched that to me, I'd shoot them. So why is Porco Rosso good? Let me get back to you on that. Porco Rosso is about a pig who flies planes. He makes his living as a bounty hunter in the Adriatic Sea, and the film begins with him rescuing a bunch of children from seaplane pirates who are way too happy to be hostages. Seriously, these kids have seen the horrors and laughed in their face. Porco spends his time hunting pirates, hiding out in his little grotto, and decidedly ignoring the absolutely stunning honey-voiced woman who couldn't possibly be more into him if she absorbed herself into the pores of his skin, when one day an American shoots his plane down and he has to travel all the way to Italy to have it repaired. While Porco's plane is being repaired by a young and brilliant engineer named Theo, the question of who he is and why he's a pig starts coming to light. Porco was a World War I flying ace, no, not that one, a different one, who lost his best friend in the war, and after Italy was overtaken by fascists, he deserted and became a bounty hunter in the sea.
I'd rather be a pig than a fascist.
I've run into some people who are confused as to why Porco is magically transformed into a pig, but it's really just symbolic of how he feels about himself. Porco is dismissive of most people and works in a profession that tends to have a negative outlook on life, but he also hates himself and considers himself a coward who only looks out for his own interests. You could just as easily replace pig with beast or grimesoul. However, his engineer Theo is apparently the daughter of Hayao Miyazaki because she was raised on extremely romanticized stories about the Air Force and seaplane pilots specifically, and in the process of fixing his ship and stowing away back onto the Adriatic when the fascists catch wind of him, she helps Porco get his mojo back by betting herself in a seaplane fight. What? In an unusual twist for Miyazaki, misogyny is a pretty big theme in this film. Porco describes himself as a womanizer and even dismisses the idea of Theo working on his plane because she's a woman, and he's weirdly upfront about that too.
Are you leaving because I'm a woman? Or is it because I'm too young?
Actually, it's both, kiddo.
Theo's grandfather, seemingly aware of the kind of person Porco is, tells him not to get any funny ideas about Theo, and hell, all of the pirates are salivating over both her and Gina, and Curtis only agrees to fight Porco because of the chance to marry a... let me check here... 17-year-old girl is on the line. Yeah, this film's not subtle about the kind of men we're dealing with here. To his very small credit, Porco is about the only male character in the film, aside from her grandfather that is, that doesn't try to hit on Theo, and Theo's grandfather seems to just be giving him shit for the sake of it. And Porco's motivation to fight Curtis at the end isn't even for the sake of honor or whatnot, but just to keep Theo out of the ridiculous bet she made in the first place. Theo is the best part of the film. She is utterly fucking unhinged, and where most of the film's comedy comes from. Without her, the movie is just old men wallowing in self-pity. Honestly, she's the real hero, as she designs a really good fucking plane. It's built by her and the women in her family, and ultimately she's not even betting on Porco, she's betting on her own brilliance. That being said, it does slip into similar problems that Castle in the Sky had. Whenever Miyazaki's films slip into discussing misogyny, much of it ends up being played for laughs. The viewer is supposed to laugh at all of these aging men fawning over a teenager. Conversely, Takahata's films always take this kind of behavior deadly seriously. It's a problem that tends to run underneath a lot of anime, if we're being honest, as a lot of the best creators are old fucks, and a lot of the younger creators are otaku shut-ins. You only really get away from it in anime both written and directed by women. I said and, not or. Put your hand down. Like most of Miyazaki's films, Porco Rosso's themes aren't that difficult to discuss or summarize, and yet I found myself having a lot of fun with the film that I can't quite put my finger on. I suppose it helps the film was on the shorter side of Ghibli's output, only about 94 minutes compared to the 120 to 150 that they normally get, so the film doesn't really overstay its welcome, which it absolutely would have. It comes in, shows you a miserable old fuck who peaked in the Mile High Club, brings in a genius teenager to smack him in the back of the head with a cattle prod, and then fucks off after the character development is done. Seriously though, get those kids some therapy.
It's raining men. Hallelujah, it's raining men. Amen. I'm gonna go out. I'm gonna let myself get absolutely soaking wet.
Pom Poko was directed by Isao Takahata and really establishes the themes of Takahata's films, which is to look at Tokyo and say, "I hate you and I hope you die." You can really feel him just banging on the glass of his urban apartment screaming, "Let me out of here! I want to return to the farm!" Pom Poko is about a bunch of tanuki, a species of raccoon that's on par with dragons when it comes to having weird legends and myths made out of them. No, these are real paintings. These are feudal age shitposts. Anyway, the raccoons are fighting a, let's be nice and say, brutal and bloody war over the most important thing, territory. The forest is shrinking because the humans keep knocking it over to make room for new houses because their cities are overcrowded. Except they're not, it's just too expensive for most people to live in the city. Those condos have to stay empty so that they don't depreciate in value. The raccoons decide the sensible and level-headed thing to do is learn to master the lost art of transformation, infiltrate the humans, and slit their throats when their backs are turned. What do you mean that's too inappropriate for a children's film? They all have their balls out, Isao. All-out war breaks out as the raccoons attack and disrupt human construction efforts by driving trucks and equipment off the roads. When that doesn't work, they try exploiting a bunch of gullible, superstitious rubes by pretending to be angry spirits to the point of frightening one cop into suicide. Over the course of the film, they end up reaching for bigger and bigger hauntings. None of it actually works because the symbols and iconography they use in their hauntings are no longer revered the way they'd been before. They're a novelty, and oftentimes their hauntings are simply assumed to be a performance by a theater group or some other mode of entertainment. This is emphasized by two old men who are sitting at the booth drinking themselves blind while all these surreal images play out before them, and the two of them are just talking about how none of that is real, it's just your brain playing tricks on you. Later, a news broadcast probably hits the raccoons the hardest.
Yeah, something strange is definitely going on in Nutama. I'd like to move out, but I just can't afford to.
Some of the people living there would probably leave after all the shit the raccoons are doing, and the raccoons possibly could have won, but they just can't afford to. In the end, despite all their efforts, the raccoons' only recourse is to simply transform into humans and live among them in their world, assimilating completely into urban life. The film carries a lot of Takahata's usual fare. If you've seen a Takahata film before, you've seen this. He hates urban living and romanticizes rural life, but there's an additional factor in here in the fact that a lot of the story deals with assimilation. This is probably as allegorical as Ghibli films get, as the raccoons' tactics to keep the humans out of their forests rely on spiritual traditions that have been boiled away by post-war reconstruction and private industry. Much of the film revolves around the fact that while the raccoons can scare away the workers, ultimately they are only replaced by new workers who need the money, and the police come in to handle the rest, all of them operating at the behest of a corporate mogul too far away from the hauntings to care. This particular film is probably the most aggressively anti-capitalist of Ghibli's work, and covers a part of capitalism that few people are ever willing to talk about: how capitalism strangles the culture out of anything it touches, stripping it from people and turning it into novelty products to sell. The fact that an anime film is talking about this is especially poignant, as American weebs have always had this very nasty habit of attributing the consequences of late-stage capitalism to culture when they happen in countries that aren't white. There's a very potent grief on display in the film, not just for the wilderness, but rural life that late-stage capitalism destroyed. People have a habit of claiming Takahata's work is reminiscent of Stanley Kubrick, but in all honesty, it feels more reminiscent of Tolkien. The lamentation of the natural world being lost to industry, the impersonality of urban sprawl boiling away your friends and neighborhood, the profound sense of loss at coming home to find a factory where your childhood home had been, and the pursuit of gold slowly scraping away everything you are, you have ever been, or will ever be, to devote yourself only to it and nothing else. It's all very evocative of Tolkien. So you might be expecting me to give this film a star and move on, but... and here's the third act twist, I actually really fucking hate this movie. The second half is very beautiful and sad, but a lot of the film is just spent watching the raccoons being assholes as they continuously fight a bleak and unwinnable war against urban development. You already know where the film is ultimately going about 40 minutes in, and like every other Takahata film, it's a full 2 hours long, so it's just overloaded with a lot of repetition. There's a concept of density in storytelling, which is how much information is being conveyed in a given length of time, and Pom Poko is on the low density end of the spectrum. It's especially not helped that the narration by Maurice LaMarche is so mind-numbingly boring that I had to watch the film twice because the first time it was late, I'd been up for 20 hours and I kept nodding off. I was sorely tempted to scrap this entire video right here because holy fuck, this film is so fucking dull. A lot of the interesting parts about assimilation and capitalism salting the earth don't even come in until 3/4 of the way through. I was already halfway through the films by the time I watched this, enough to know that I overwhelmingly favored the more grounded and less fantastical Ghibli films. And Pom Poko is just a lesser version of Only Yesterday and Nausicaa. It certainly has a sad ending and tries very hard to make you feel the totality of loss that the raccoons are facing, but the fact of the matter is that his other films just do it better. Whisper of the Heart is one of the Girlhood 5. What the fuck is that? Good question. There's a grouping of about 5 films from Ghibli that all take place in conventional suburbia and lack the whimsical fantasy or harsh and grueling themes of the usual Ghibli fare. And they're almost entirely about young women dealing with issues of growing up, their identity, and the tumultuous world of romance. I feel like for most Ghibli fans who haven't already seen all of them, these can be the hardest to recommend. Pop culture has already decided that teenage girls are the most annoying thing ever, and if you aren't willing to empathize with teenage girls, you're in for a frustrating time with what looks like, on the surface, to be a story about dumb kids with their dumb kid problems. Personally, I find your ability to empathize with kids like this depends on how bad your childhood was. Like, the worse it was, the easier it is to empathize with their rather tame struggles. The poster for Whisper the Heart may suggest this film is a flight of fancy, but in fact, this is not the case. The film follows, what the fuck was her name again? Shizuku. You know, sometimes I find the names of anime characters to be hard to remember because so many of them are spelled and pronounced similarly, and it makes me wonder if people in non-English speaking countries feel the same about the fact that there are 70 different ways to spell Michaela. The film follows Shizuku, a lonely shut-in who spends all of her time checking out books and reading them cover to cover before rushing back to the library to check out even more, like the exact opposite of a Potterhead. Over the course of the story, she becomes fixated on a boy who keeps checking these books out before she can, who turns out to be a guy who is routinely giving her grief, much to her intense dismay. Throughout the film, Shizuku gets roped into a love lightning bolt about a guy who likes her friend, who likes another guy, who likes Shizuku, who likes a completely different guy. Okay, but put the brakes on everything. That should have been the whole plot of the film. That is fucking wild. I want to see how that works out. She's also working on rewriting the lyrics to the song Take Me Home Country Roads, which plays so many damn times throughout the film. When I first played this movie, it was actually set to Japanese, and I didn't realize that because the film opens with Country Roads on both versions, which made me ask several fucking questions. That wasn't something in the dub? The movie's just like that? Anyway, about 2/3 of the way through the film, the main plot actually starts with Shizuku being anxious over the fact that she's about to step into high school without knowing what she wants to do with her life. This is not helped by the fact that her love interest, Seiji, knows exactly what he wants to do and is taking big steps in his life to make it happen. This leaves Shizuku feeling rather inert, and thus begins the inevitable downward cycle of hating herself for not doing anything, and then not doing anything, 20 go to 10. Eventually, Shizuku settles on writing a book about a statue of a cat she saw in an antique shop belonging to Seiji's grandfather. She spends night and day for weeks working on it, until finally her draft is complete. But she's extremely skittish about showing it to anyone, and she actually breaks down when Seiji's grandfather says it's good because, being the author, she can see the flaws plainly and is really insecure about them. Boy, the timing on this was great. I'm currently in the midst of writing my own book, and let me tell you, the brain gremlins are kicking my ass on that one. Whisper the Heart is a film I was actually quite disliking in the first half. It's slow-paced and little of note happens, but once it reaches the halfway mark, Shizuku starts bonding with Seiji, and she starts exploring a career in writing, is when a lot of the more interesting things start happening. Shizuku's story is very compelling, even for me, wading into my 30s. When you're a child, the question of what you want to do with the rest of your life is a very grim existential question, and when you're young, it feels like you only get one shot at it. The younger you are, the harder it is to really get a scope of what adult life looks like. Look at how many people in their 20s act like their 30s approaching as some kind of end point for life, where you officially become old trademark, only to turn 30 and realize, oh wait, this isn't all that different, huh? Shizuku's fears are irrational, but they are genuinely held, and this bleeds into her writing and the fear that she's not good enough, because that fear of not being good enough was why she was so inert in the first place. What if I make the wrong decision and I can't take it back? I really enjoyed Shizuku's story, which is a big turnaround, where I was about ready to give this film a D in the first half, but it really pulled through. That being said, and this is certainly a case of time not being kind to the film, I just fucking can't take the drama around Country Road seriously. It just makes me laugh, because this song has been made into a meme, and that's it. That's my only real complaint about the movie. Seriously, give this one a try. It's seriously underrated.
Country knows, take my bones to a place they don't belong. West Virginia, curse pajama, take my bones. Country knows.
Oh boy, here's one I've been dreading. I mentioned in Kiki that there are several films that are held up as sacred cows by Ghibli fans, and Mononoke may as well be the damn poster child for that one. Criticizing Mononoke is like criticizing Avatar or The Empire Strikes Back or The Burning Crusade. The reason for this is that Mononoke, unlike every other Ghibli film, is pitched right at the sensibilities of weebs. It's bloody, it's gory, it's filled with action scenes, And the plot is a carbon copy of Nausicaa, but given a Shinto coat of paint with a male lead. You could sit it right beside Inuyasha or Demon Slayer and very few people would notice. In fact, were it not for its reputation, I imagine this would be as much of an oddball film for Miyazaki as My Neighbors the Yamadas was for Takahata. All in all, this makes coming into it as someone who liked Nausicaa way more and is generally disinterested in action rather nerve-wracking, because I just know I'm gonna get some fucking letters about this one. Anyway, Princess Mononoke is about Ashitaka, a hunter in a forest village that gets attacked by a demon, but he gets struck by it and impregnated with demon jizz. His village banishes him and sends him to go and fight the evil in the west. He's given a special dagger by Kaya, who is his fiancée in the original version and his sister in the English version, and apparently nobody on the dubbing team knows when that change was made. I see you, script editor on the dubbing team, I know what you are. He ventures out into civilization to find answers about a ball of iron found inside the demon, and discovers that a massive war is going on between the evil empire, for there are no good empires, and the spirits of the forest, a wolf matriarch, and her children, one of which is conspicuously human. Anyway, once the man arrived in St. Ives, he met a lady with 20 wives. The 20 wives work in the iron smelters, turning iron sand into metal, which is used to make weapons and trade for food. The lady, her name's Boshi, goes around buying up the contracts of prostitutes and turns them into miners. It turns out they were the ones who shot the boar because they were clearing out the forest to get more iron, which angered the boar gods, and then Lady Eboshi showed up and... Lady Eboshi is an industrious woman with aspirations to rule the world, but differs from other megalomaniacs because she minds her fucking manners.
I'm sorry to have to push you all so hard. I'll have wine sent down later.
Ooh, that'll be nice.
Yeah, they're gunning, really hard for you to find Lady Eboshi sympathetic by drowning you in all the nice things she does for people, trying to make a point about how she's careless in her single-minded quest for human prosperity. This is a recurring issue in Ghibli's films about the destruction of nature that, the humans aren't malicious, they just need the room. The problem is that the destruction of the environment in real life doesn't work that way. The environment is being destroyed by an extremely small minority of people for the sake of profit. It's actually extremely easy for humans to live without destroying the environment, but instead we sprawl our cities out inefficiently over vast amounts of land to create dependency on car companies. We burn fossil fuels instead of green and renewable energy because doing so would eliminate energy scarcity and make energy free, and energy companies don't like that. And we waste energy and water on thirsty data centers so media and tech companies can hoard more wealth for themselves and fire all their human workers. This is always the problem with trying to make sympathetic villains. Their real-life counterparts just aren't at all. On the flip side is San, a woman who was raised by the wolf gods and has a burning desire to see humans driven from the forest, preferably in body bags. And she bites. Like, a lot. Turns out there's discord among the spirits of the forest. The apes want to eat Ashitaka and steal his strength. The boars have given up on life and are just going to Loktar their way into a glorious death. And while the wolves keep trying to convince everyone to fight smarter, not harder. Hence why San keeps going right to Eboshi every time she shows up. Ashitaka is caught in the middle of the ever-brewing conflict between the humans and the spirits, and unfortunately he's a filthy pacifist who takes advantage of the inhuman strength the demon's curse gives him to get in the way and cockblock any fight that might happen, both literally and metaphorically. At one point, Ashitaka asks Moro, the god of the wolves, why the humans and the animals of the forest can't live together in harmony. Of course, the answer is because the humans aren't fucking interested in it. So here's where we run into the problem. And granted, this isn't unique to Mononoke. This is a story where one side has very genuine grievances, and the other side is a power-cloying pack of selfish bastards setting fire to the very environment they need to live. Hell, most of them are only out there in the first place because the Emperor is forcing them to, because he thinks taking the head of the forest spirit will make them live forever. And our protagonist is right in the middle, blaming the war on vague, nebulous hatred. Honestly, it really feels like Ashitaka showed up to the wrong fucking movie. I'd have expected to see him in a WoW expansion whining about togetherness like Anduin or Arator. This attitude just... it doesn't work. You can't take a very clearly one-sided conflict and behave as if it's a two-sided conflict with evil on both sides. And yet so many stories keep trying to do it, and I don't fucking know why. Wouldn't dealing with the actual source of the conflict be smarter and more interesting? Look, Nausicaa didn't have this problem because the Ohm weren't sapient creatures. They're insects who minded their own business until humans tried to kill them or burn the jungle, at which point they would swarm, die, and spread the jungle. The humans' only options are stay out of the jungle or die, and the conflict is about them being too stupid and arrogant to respect nature. This aspect of Nausicaa does show up in Mononoke at the very end, when the forest spirit has its head taken and turns into a giant rampaging beast of death as it searches to get it back, and they realize the forest itself was not to be fucked with. But that's really it. Mononoke trying to both sides the same issue is simply an objective downgrade. This isn't a Crips versus Blood gang war between humans and nature that's causing the planet to die. We are, and we are the only ones doing it. And we don't have to. The way Ashitaka inserts himself into this conflict, spouting platitudes like an idiot, and surviving purely by the power of shonen protagonist, the demon's curse, takes what could have been a very interesting story on the same level as Nausicaa and turns it into a tirade of sanctimonious warbling. Hey, we're gonna make a film that's bloodier than our usual fare. Now let's have the lead character hate fighting. It's just so cliche. Oh, also, Ashitaka falls in love with San at some point. Not sure exactly where that happens, but speaking of things that are unusually cliche, there's another one too. Like, aren't you already engaged? Or not, depending on the language. Maybe I would like Mononoke better if I'd seen it as a child and if I hadn't already seen Nausicaa at the same time. Hell, going into this, I expected to give it an A and point out how Nausicaa simply did it better, but my opinion of it worsens now I've seen it and see how much it's working from a cheat sheet. Also, one last thing, but it's really weird hearing Tara Strong in this. It feels like she just dropped off the face of the earth a few years back. Anyway, Mononoke is certainly a fine movie if the pacifist trying to mediate a one-sided conflict doesn't already make your eyes roll out of your skull, but it is drastically overhyped. I've heard people call this the greatest animated movie ever made, and frankly, that's not even fucking close. That title belongs to a different Ghibli film, and there are other Ghibli films in between it. Anyway, moving along.
The UN had a climate talk in 92. In 94, we got genetically modified food. In 97, a climate pact was reached in Kyoto. The world said, let's do it. The US said, I don't know. And as the research predicted, throughout the early aughts, the weather got weird and treacherous and hot.
My Neighbors the Yamadas is an adaptation of a newspaper comic that ran for about 6 years in the 1990s. A slice-of-life comic, it was basically the Japanese equivalent to Calvin and Hobbes, but without the philosophy divergences. The film takes a number of short stories and stitches them together without anything approaching a coherent narrative. This isn't unusual for Ghibli's work. There's a lot of soft mood pieces in their catalog. Honestly, it's akin to a more grounded version of Howl's Moving Castle. What is unusual is that it's directed by Isao Takahata, the director of Grave of the Fireflies and Only Yesterday. This one is probably the lightest of his films and the least bitterly scathing about urban living. The film stars the titular Yamadas, Takashi, Matsuko, Noburo, Nonoko, and the grandmother Shija. It opens with a big display about life as an adventure where Takashi and Matsuko go from their wedding to a naval adventure across the world to symbolize life's up and downs, and it's a little tongue-in-cheek.
Even the stupidest couple can survive life's challenges if they just stick together. Have children as fast as you can. Children are the best reason to weather life's storms.
This leads to them finding their children. Their eldest they pluck out of a peach in the river, and the youngest they find by cutting open some bamboo and no, not the suicide baby! Following this, we get a number of different vignettes, starting with the family accidentally leaving Nonoko at the department store, then Matsuko having ADHD, to Takashi and Matsuko quarreling like an old married couple being ravaged by Compet, to Takashi and Noburo trying to bond and failing horribly. This family is very dysfunctional, but a fun kind of dysfunctional, like The Simpsons. Actually, shit, The Simpsons are probably the best point of comparison as it really is just an animated dom-com. Now, that being said, the film is way too fucking long. As a film, it's more akin to those 3-part TV pilots disguised as a film that, Disney used to release all the fucking time, except it's many parts and over 2 hours long. Granted, none of Takahata's films are under 2 hours, but this one was the one they really should have been culled down to a more reasonable length. I was quite enjoying it until about the halfway mark when the novelty wore off and I started nodding off, which was especially infuriating because it meant I had to watch it a second time to get the pieces that I missed, and then I had to watch it a third time because I stalled writing the script for so long that I forgot most of what happened in it. Who's your favorite character, CD? The baby, obviously. Nonoko's got the best possible energy the entire film. She's just vibing through everything. When she gets left behind at the mall, she doesn't consider herself lost. It's just everyone else that's lost. She's actually the main character of the original comic, at least according to Wikipedia, and she has a very Calvin by way of Bonnie presence in the entire story. Shija is a close second, mostly because she's voiced by Tress MacNeille, but also because she's the most level-headed of the group. Given that the Yamadas are, for the most part, like someone took the Griffins and replaced all the abuse with more grimacing, that's a sorely needed element for them. And that's really it. If you want to watch a dom-com anime, this is the only port of call. Okay, there's plenty of dom-com animes, but I mean one whose plot doesn't turn into one of these.
We'll sail around the world by ship. I'll give my whole wad as a tip, but first I'll kill my family with a knife.
Yes, he's gonna kill his family with a knife.
Irregardless of this waitress, I will kill them with a knife.
Oh boy, let me tell you guys, I was nervous about this one. I'd actually seen Spirited Away when I was 10 and like once later in my teens, and for this video I watched Spirited Away after like all the Takahata films, so I was genuinely nervous that I'd come away finding the film anemic. That didn't happen. Spirited Away is still amazing, but it is also kind of anemic. Spirited Away has the reputation of being the greatest Ghibli film ever made, and in some cases the best animated film ever made. I wouldn't agree with that. In fact, I feel another Ghibli film deserves both of those titles, but we'll get into it later. Spirited Away is probably most millennials' first introduction to Ghibli's work, and as a result, it often sticks out in their minds as this wondrous and almost magical experience. I myself first saw it at a youth center with my sister when we were like 10 years old, only to get picked up by our father 3/4 of the way through, and then we'd spend the next 3 months trying to figure out how it ended. I didn't actually see the end of it until I was 17. CD, what kind of childhood did you have? Oh, a bad one, but not because of that. Spirited Away is about this girl, I forget her name, who is upset about moving to a new town. During the move, her parents stop to explore a creepy tunnel with a creepy statue in front of it. Naturally, being a 10-year-old girl, she starts whining and bitching and crying about the fact that her parents are going off into the creepy foreshadowing tube. Deciding not to be left behind, she follows them, where they pig out on other people's food and turn into pigs themselves. It turns out this is the spirit world. Now this girl, oh I remember, her name's Chihiro, has to find protection in the employ of the bathhouse, where spirits gather to wash off the grime of having to be in any place where humans are. While working at the bathhouse, Chihiro has to figure out how to both save her parents and save the nice dragon boy who helped her out in the first place. It's a relatively straightforward story, largely focused on Chihiro having to emotionally mature from the whining, selfish pissant she was at the start of the film into someone more independent and concerned for others. In the process, you get all that delightfully strange Hayao Miyazaki imagery. An interesting thing about the film is the way in which its mood slowly decreases over time. At the start, it's very high energy, with Chihiro nervous and anxious in the spirit world, going through rather intense moments of action? Can we call it action? Really, are all action scenes to be defined by fighting? Tell me in the comments, you fucking engagement pigs. Anyway, once we hit the halfway point, the film mellows out severely, matching the tone and energy of a Takahata film. There's a turning point after the river spirit where Chihiro's attitude changes, and so does the energy of the film. The plot's sort of all over the place, told with a series of interconnecting vignettes between arriving in the spirit world, getting a job, the river spirit, saving Haku from Zeniba, traveling to return Zeniba's seal, and then returning to rescue Chihiro's parents. Actually, rescuing them comes about almost entirely by accident, when Yubaba's child is held hostage by Chihiro, and Haku uses that to barter for Chihiro's freedom. Chihiro's agency comes from her kindness, the way she risks her life for Haku's sake for no other reason than because Haku comforted her when she was afraid, and that kindness is repaid in Haku securing freedom for her and her parents, though that itself comes with the caveat that Chihiro has to be able to identify them. A lot of people will praise how Chihiro's virtue is her empathy, and while that's a good thing, it's something I tend to cock an ear at because a lot of anime with women leads will center empathy and emotions as their primary virtues over the ability to fight, and well, that's a very patriarchal idea of women's strengths. It's not something I've marked the film down for. There's a difference between an old man being as patriarchal as the world he grew up in and a creator actively degrading women. It's just one of those things where once you notice it, you can't stop noticing it. Chihiro's relationship with Haku is probably the highlight of the film, as the two knew each other long before this, though they'd since forgotten. Haku is the spirit of a river that had been filled in by humans years ago. It's one of the more subtle environmental jabs in a Ghibli film, but human development has actively displaced this poor river spirit from his home and doomed him into service to Yubaba. As I mentioned in the Pom Poko segment, a common element of Ghibli films, often understated by Miyazaki and laboriously laid out by Takahata, is humanity's often stubborn refusal to live in harmony with nature. Humanity destroys and bulldozes nature to expand its harsh, concrete jungles that only become less and less livable, either due to how hot they become or how expensive they are. This is where it's at its most subtle, as the cost of destroying the river has driven this poor spirit away from his home forever. Sadly, their friendship isn't going to last, as once Chihiro and her family leave the spirit world, their memories of it are gone and they return to their normal boring lives. Aside from the raw plot, there isn't much else to discuss. Like most Miyazaki films, the story is light and more focused on how it makes the viewer feel than what it makes them think about. It's a coming-of-age story in the most direct fashion. Something that is interesting about Spirited Away is the fact that it is ultimately about very little, but a lot of people are in deep denial about that. There's a conspiracy theory that pops up every few years about how Spirited Away is actually about sex trafficking, with the bathhouse being a thinly veiled metaphor for prostitution. This keeps happening because there's an almost cloying desire to find the secret hidden truths in children's media. It's Spirited Away's own coma theory. You can't have something this mystical without it being secretly about something else. A big part of this is because people are taught that every good story is dripping in symbolism and allegory, and even other anime can be rife with symbolism even to the point it negatively impacts the story. Spirited Away, therefore, is a very good movie, therefore it must have these things. But the funny thing about Ghibli is they do not do this. They never have. If they make a movie that is about something, It is very, very, very explicitly about that thing. Only Yesterday is explicitly about stifling formal culture and anti-urbanism. Princess Kaguya is explicitly anti-patriarchy. The idea that Ghibli would hide a story behind symbolism and subtext is really funny after Grave of the Fireflies, 2 hours of children slowly dying from their own pride and the cruel indifference of the system. If they wanted to make a movie about sex trafficking, they would just make a movie about sex trafficking and say, deal with it. The idea that they would do something like this to hide that or tell it with subtlety is absolutely ridiculous.
I know writers who use subtext and they're all cowards.
Anyway, I just thought that was funny. Spirited Away is great and it would probably be perfect if it was actually about something.
Child labor's back in a big way. Child labor in the totally not evil USA. Hey, kids, if you know what's good, you'll sacrifice your childhood to save the economy with child labor.
The Cat Returns is a pseudo-sequel to Whisper of the Heart, and is to date the only sequel that Ghibli has made so far. I say pseudo-sequel because it's actually a book being written by Shizuku, presumably as part of a series based on what she wrote as a kid. The film is about Haru, a bumbling, clumsy high school girl who saves the life of a magic cat from being hit by a truck and, as a reward, is forcibly engaged to him and whisked away to the land of talking magical bipedal cats. If this were made in the 2020s, that truck would have absolutely smeared her ass across the pavement and yeeted her soul into Cat Narnia. I think Haru might be my favorite Ghibli protagonist. She's very goofy. This was one of the last films I watched, and I found a lot of their protagonists were starting to bleed together after a while, but Haru, with her fucking deer in the headlights look and general bumbling foolishness, was just such a breath of fresh air. In the past, I've often slagged off protagonists for whom it feels like the plot happens at them rather than being an active participant. But let's be honest, if you had an entire royal procession of talking cats showing up outside your house, you just go along with it too. The best part is when one of the cats offers to bring her to the kingdom of cats and marry the prince. She says, maybe she'd fit in better as a cat. Girl, you would not. You're as graceful as a house of cards and a tumble dryer.
No, I didn't agree to that. Hey, wait! Ah! Ow!
Haru decides to get Hap from the Cat Bureau because of fucking course there's a Cat Bureau, where the Baron from Whisper of the Heart helps her navigate the tumultuous world of Cat Kingdom politics. And the whole movie is just nonsense upon nonsense upon nonsense. Like, she tries to get out of the wedding by pointing out she's not a cat, and they just fucking turn her into a cat. Someone fucking dies halfway through the film, and they just move on, and he just comes back without a second thought. But Haru's still fucking losing it. She's constantly trying to explain that she can't be with a cat, but then she dances with the Baron and instantly starts developing a thing for him, like the useless little gremlin she is. All of this is a book written by Shizuku, so someone is in universe writing a story where a teenage girl falls in love with a fucking cat who's actually a statue, and honestly, that's still a better love story than Twilight. I swear, the Baron is like if Lloyd Forger was British. And a cat. Look, I'm not gonna have a lot of in-depth things to say about this movie. It's just a fun adventure movie starring the most adorable gremlin child to ever grace a film screen, and a lot of cats getting hit with canes. It's like Alice in Wonderland right down to the protagonist just vibing and panicking her way through the story. And then, at the end of the film, the prince comes back and is like, Dad, what the fuck are you doing? Did you kidnap a girl? I already have a girlfriend, get off the meth. This movie is so fucking funny. You have no goddamn idea. If you have not seen this movie, turn this video off and go watch it right now. I'm fucking serious.
Cats, I'm a kitty cat. Cats, I'm a kitty cat. Cats, I'm a kitty cat. I'm a kitty cat.
Okay, so Howl's Moving Castle. Alright, I need to come clean about something. I do not think I am giving Howl's Moving Castle a fair shake. When I do marathons like this, my opinion of one thing can be greatly colored by what I saw before it. When doing the Nami games, I played Sex Advice Succubus after Astra's Garden, which greatly contributed to my not finding that game all that interesting, because Astra's Garden was the top of the top. And with Howl's Moving Castle, even people who like it will confess that it's a pretty simple story without much meat to it, and my problem is that I watched it after after the tale of Princess Kaguya. Oh my god. Howl, I am so sorry. I am not about to be fair to you at all. So Howl's Moving Castle is about a woman named Sophie who runs afoul of a witch and gets transformed into an old woman. She goes searching for a way to reverse it and runs into the titular Howl and his mobile castle. She poses as a cleaning lady, hoping she'll eventually find a cure in the lair of a powerful wizard, and it turns out that Howl is actually hiding from individual people he's run afoul of, as well as the government, who is trying to turn every wizard into an arm of the military. Also, Howl has been cursed to be without his heart and occasionally turns into a giant bird. Hey, wait a fucking minute. Yeah, this is the Owl House, but without loose. Or a plot. As Sophie spends her time in Howl's castle, she inexplicably falls in love with him. It's not really stated exactly when this happens, but at some point other characters start bringing up that she's in love with Howl. Heavens knows why. Howl's kind of an obnoxious pissant, and at one point has a minor mental breakdown because his hair gets turned a different color.
I see no point in living if I can't be.
Oh, come on, Howl. You look like someone put Nausicaa on testosterone. The story largely centers around Howl's attempts to avoid being drafted into the military as part of some big magic war or something. The head sorceress paints Howl as a selfish man who uses magic for greed. I don't really know. I heard another YouTuber describe this film as a lovely fever dream, but I wouldn't even give it that. It's just really unfocused as a story. Sophie's looking for Howl to lift her curse, but it's going away on its own, except it's also not. There's two warring countries. One wants Howl to join the military, and then he does, but also doesn't, but also does. There's the evil Witch of the Waste who is evil one minute, then friendly the next, and is also losing her power except when she isn't. Howl's Moving Castle at times feels like Fantasia being very loosely driven by a plot. It feels like an animator wrote it. Okay, an animator literally did write it, but it feels like something that would have been written by the storyboards rather than a script. The visuals are certainly amazing, but there's no connective tissue between them. One thing I do sincerely dislike about this film is that it almost ends up with a theme when Howl laments that it's pointless to exist if you can't be beautiful. Given that Sophie literally has her youth stolen from her, and the Witch of the Waste turns into Jabba the Hutt, there's almost this theme of vanity. But it never really gets there. It just gets dropped. Sophie eventually purges herself of the curse somehow, save for her gray hair. The vanity and callous disregard for things that a shallow asshole would consider ugly just quietly abandoned. Actually, you know what? Watching this movie felt like the memory of a childhood movie. Think of an animated movie you watched as a little kid, like 5 or 6 years old, that you haven't revisited as an adult. For me, it would be Babar the movie. Can you remember the plot, or does remembering it only conjure scenes and sequences that you can't tie to a particular narrative because you were too young to understand what's going on? Yeah, that's what Howl's Moving Castle is like. So yeah, I take it back. Jello was right. This is a fever dream. Tales from Earthsea is an adaptation of the 4 Earthsea books by Ursula K. Le Guin, about a fantasy world where magic is dying and everything is terrible. There's a plague affecting the livestock and the people in the kingdom. The court wizard suggests that this is being caused by the disappearance of the light of the balance that sustains the world. There's an easy way to tell you're watching bad fantasy, because a plague doesn't start because someone was fucking around with chemicals or random chance. It's because the world is out of balance, whatever that fucking means. While the king is retiring for the night, he gets murdered by his own son, who steals a sword with boobs on it and runs off. The prince, Arin, flees into distant lands, being miserable, angsty, and twitchy, and befriends a mage named Sparrowhawk, who takes him on an adventure of self-discovery by working on a farm, because this is a Ghibli film and they love farms more than people. Turns out that magic is vanishing from the world, and all the mages have been downgraded from 2nd edition D&D to 5th edition D&D. Sparrowhawk thinks that there is someone out there trying to upset the balance, though he's not sure who or why. After leaving to let him rest, Arin finds a girl being chased by slavers and suddenly unlocks the legendary power of giving a shit, except not really, when he fights off the mercs trying to kidnap her. Unfortunately, this act of either kindness or ego gets him sucker punched and captured into slavery before Sparrowhawk rescues him. He takes him to a farm which happens to be the home of the girl he rescued, who hates and avoids him because she thinks Arin is a nihilist who doesn't care about his own or anyone's life while he was in his crash out mode. This girl, her name's Teru, along with Arin, is routinely hunted by an evil wizard's slave hunting posse, and these two elements of the plot are brought together when Teru's mother is kidnapped to lure Sparrowhawk and Arin out to fight his master, said evil wizard. Earthsea has a very exhausted vibe to it. Most of the characters talk in whispery tones. The story is slow and quiet, and it really wants you to sit and immerse yourself in how the characters are feeling. I actually found it difficult to pay attention to on first viewing early in the project, but late in the project, I decided to put it on while I was sewing or playing low-attention games like Elite Dangerous and found it extremely absorbing, from a mood point at least. The plot itself is very generic grim fantasy about the balance and magic and the scheming machinations of an evil wizard, while Aren appears to be afflicted with strange murderous impulses that cause him to kill his father and occasionally tell someone to kill themselves. Much of the plot centers around the machinations of Cobb, the aforementioned evil wizard who is trying to achieve eternal life and who talks like he's auditioning for NPR. Cobb and Sparrowhawk spend most of the film spouting fantasy lore keywords about the balance and the wizard leave and knick-knack-knocky and bingly-bongly-boo. But in a strange twist of fate, the lead character is so very clearly mentally ill, but rather than the film being about that, it has to be couched in fantasy jargon about saving the world because, I don't know, fantasy stories can never be grounded. It always has to be some world-ending threat. Oh, also, I had this thought midway through, but here you have Sparrowhawk, a wise old wizard who once had dreams of eternal life, but has decided to accept death as an inevitability, his student Cobb, whose sole motivation in life is to defeat death itself and find the magical secret to eternal life, and the lead character wedged between them, afflicted with equal parts bouts of heroism and bouts of uncharacteristic murderous rage. Does this sound familiar to anyone else? Earthsea is a film I was actually quite liking in the first half, but once all the cliche fantasy jargon came in was when I started spacing out. The thing is, while everyone agrees that this movie is actually really dull, I'm in the minority of people who think that the original books it's based on weren't all that good either. But the additional problem Earthsea has is that this is the director's first film. Not first film directed, first film ever made or worked on ever. Goro Miyazaki, the son of Hayao Miyazaki, was placed in the director's chair extremely unwisely. That this is what came out of the film is actually rather impressive, and makes me wonder what Goro could have made if Ghibli hadn't put him through what is, for all intents and purposes, a hazing ritual. Tales from Earthsea is most well known for two things. For one, being the first and for a long time only Ghibli film that most would agree was bad, but also for the fact that Hayao Miyazaki behaved like a world-class piece of shit after the film released, resulting in him and his son being estranged for years. Unfortunately, it seems Earthsea as a film was just the victim of ego and spite, handed to the new guy and given to the task of adapting a story that was both difficult to adapt and worshipped by a pack of bibliophiles and then left to rot by the studio. I feel bad even giving it a bad grade. I feels like I'm just kicking a film when it's already down. Yeah, I'm not going to linger on this one. And now we're at Ponyo. Ponyo is the most recent of Ghibli's massive mega-hit films. It frequently tops charts alongside Spirited Away and Kiki as the best of Ghibli's work. The film is a literal fish-out-of-water story about Ponyo, a little fish girl who escapes from her father, gets stuck in a jar, no! And is saved by a little boy. Oh, thank goodness. The boy takes a liking to her, while her father, voiced by Liam Neeson, goes out on land to search for her, making use of a very particular set of skills. Oh, don't give me that look, it came out the same year. Ponyo and Sosuke form a very fast friendship, and much of the film is centered around them trying to maintain that friendship in the face of Ponyo's father trying to bring her back to the sea, because humans are terrible people who ruin and poison the planet. Yeah, so it's Little Mermaid, but without the romance. Misanthropic father, fish turns into a human to be with her friend, it's all there. I have been so far pretty down on the Ghibli films that have little in the way of themes, but Ponyo is extremely charming, largely because it's just a story about love that isn't painfully amatonormative. The little babies want friends, they must socialize.
You scared me. Don't turn into a fish again. I'd miss you.
Ponyo's target of affection, Sosuke, is a 5-year-old boy with a father in the Navy and a mother who works at a senior home and also drives like a maniac. Sosuke has little in the way of friends, being largely alienated from other children and spending a lot of time at his mother's place of work entertaining the old people. So he and Ponyo find each other seemingly at the exact point they both really need each other. They actually get separated at first, and then at the halfway point they get reunited with a level of delight that's just infectious. This fish baby has one mission, and it's to find the silly boy that fed her the flesh of the living. Unfortunately, Ponyo's little jailbreak seems to have accidentally set off an apocalypse that is causing the moon to draw closer and increasingly flood the planet until every human being drowns. Welcome to the least heavy Ghibli film, everyone! Said apocalypse has been engineered by her father, an immortal sea wizard who hates humans and wants to keep his daughter away from them and dreams of returning the Earth to a primordial ocean. I didn't realize the Cambrian explosion was a suicide bombing, but okay. Ponyo's mother, an immortal sea goddess, oh, did I mention Ponyo's a demigod of the ocean? Decides to let Ponyo remain a human forever by testing Sosuke's love. If his love is true, she'll be a human forever, and if it isn't, Ponyo will turn into sea foam. Okay, Miyazaki, I know you're older than the Warsaw Pact, but people didn't get married that young, even back then. The next morning, the town is flooded, and Sosuke and Ponyo have to take a pop-pop boat out to find his mother, who went missing the night before. Unfortunately, while they find the car, she isn't there. He's about to break down, but it's okay. He has Ponyo with him. Turns out the old ladies and Sosuke's mother were taken into an air bubble by Ponyo's father while they administer the ocean's test of undying devotion, which works and Ponyo gets to be a human with her new friend. In recent years, I've become ironically enamored with non-romantic love and stories, so films like this really tickle my brain, Jillian. It actually is a romance CD. Wait, what? But they're like 5. Okay. Kind of took the wind out of my sails there. I did some searching around, and it seems like the general consensus is that this is a standard love story, with most of the arguments against that just balking at how young they are. But after some reflection, it is kind of amusing. Little kids have a habit of just imitating the grown-ups around them, and sometimes they just decide their partners on a whim. Usually it is swiftly forgotten about 6 hours later, but it would be interesting to see a pair just keep that energy going forever. Like, imagine being their classmates in high school. You ask them how long they've been dating, they say 12 years, and you can never know whether or not they're fucking with you. Okay, I'm convinced that would be funny as hell, so I'm going with that read of the film. Ponyo is just a good movie. It's unique in that while there's a lot of whimsy in Miyazaki's work, they often have a lot of personal character drama. Even My Neighbor Totoro has it. Ponyo doesn't. This is the lightest film in their catalog. You could actually show it to preschoolers. That makes it both very popular and the elephant in the room when animation snobs start getting huffy about Disney and Pixar being too kiddie. Because when it comes to the kind of person who would point to Ghibli as an example of animation for an older audience, they will inevitably point to films that are still extremely safe and child-friendly and avoid the actually dark and heavy films like The Plague. And Ponyo has just sat a little too close to them for comfort. But this film's great. I was actually dreading this one by sheer reputation as the most toothless of Ghibli's films, but I was pleasantly surprised. Who wouldn't love The Little Mermaid but Schmore?
Ocean man, take me by the hand, lead me to the land that you understand. Ocean man, the voyage to the corner of the globe is a real trip.
The Secret World of Arietty is an adaptation of the British series of novels The Borrowers, about a race of little human beings who live in the walls and under the floors of human homes, getting by through stealing small amounts of essentials like tissue paper, pins, nails, and scraps of food. Films about tiny people are always fascinating on a visual level because you get to see an otherwise normal everyday place from an angle that turns it into a near fantastical world. Real care was taken in Arietty towards things like how the borrowers get around by using nails as mountain climbing infrastructure, or the surface tension of a small drop of water. You really get a feel for how an ordinary place can be terrifying to something too small to be there. The film centers around one family of them, where the titular Arietty befriends a human boy named Sean, who is living with a heart condition that can turn out to be fatal if he gets too excited. In the process, Sean's housekeeper also discovers the little people and wants to reveal them to the world for... I'm not exactly sure why. I think she just wants to prove they exist so the people won't think she's crazy. However, being revealed is actually extremely dangerous for the borrowers, as humans often view them as pests and will kill them, so when they're discovered, they have to leave for somewhere else. And this includes when Arietty befriends Sean. Humans are so dangerous to the borrowers that the risk that a human is a nice one is simply too great. Especially once Sean starts trying to help and inadvertently brings the wrath of the housekeeper onto them. There's an interesting undercurrent with the story about how the desire to help can often very easily harm, and oftentimes the best way to help someone is the way in which they wish to be helped. In Arietty's case, that's to leave her and her family alone, something Sean utterly fails to do, right up to the point that Arietty actually needs his help rescuing her mother after the housekeeper put her in a jar. No, not the jar! In terms of essential theme, the best the film has to offer is perseverance. Both Arietty and Sean are dealing with some degree of existential dread. Arietty's species, the borrowers, are on the brink of extinction and are spread out so far that they rarely ever see anyone else. Arietty even briefly labors under the impression that the three of them are the last of their kind until she meets another who confirms that there are a lot more. Sean is living with a potentially fatal heart condition and is actually scheduled for an operation to fix it. However, he's extremely pessimistic about the whole ordeal and has almost accepted that he's going to die. He even projects this onto Arietty during one conversation.
You must be afraid you'll be the only ones of your kind who are left. Every year there's fewer and fewer of you, right? Aren't you scared that soon you'll all be gone?
I gotta say, this moment's kind of fucked up with the way he smiles about it. Aren't you scared you're gonna be all dead soon? Aren't you afraid of oblivion? Can you feel your heart burning? Can you feel the struggle within? Like, okay, take it down a notch, buckaroo. Sean and Arietty reflect the pessimism and optimism people can find in tense or dire circumstances. Sean seems ready to lay down and die, while Arietty denies the idea of an impending extinction, and right up until she gets actual confirmation that there are hundreds more of them. It's Arietty who ends up having an effect on Sean, as by the end of the film, after going on a high-stakes rescue adventure with her to the dangerous and deadly pantry, that he has a brighter outlook on life. It's a very simple and very grounded film about the mundane drive to live. It's another film I struggled to find anything heavy or interesting to say about, but at the same time it's one of my favorites. It's deeply sentimental and relaxed. I actually put this on as a palate cleanser for my wife after we watched Grave of the Fireflies, specifically because it's a very light and sentimental film. Yonbayashi's films just have this very airy and serene quality to them that makes them perfect for a lazy Sunday afternoon.
Little people with great big plans. Little people, we've got helping hands.
From Up on Poppy Hill is probably the most surprising film on the list. I think it's safe to say that Goro Miyazaki isn't a great filmmaker, but that's not really his fault. He was put in the director's chair entirely because of who his father is, where most directors have been in the industry for a long time. And it's not that his films are explicitly bad, they're just wildly outclassed. Tales from Earthsea and From Up on Poppy Hill don't look great compared to Only Yesterday or Grave of the Fireflies, but in all fairness, neither do any of these. Anyway, From Up on Poppy Hill sits in this comfortable middle point of Ghibli's work, where most of their films are either in adorable childhood whimsy or themes so heavy they'd crush your sternum. Poppy Hill is a grounded story about two children from military families trying their best to respect their deceased parents and respect the time and era they came from against the rampaging march of modernity. Specifically, they want to keep an old newspaper clubhouse from being demolished in favor of infrastructure intended for the Summer Olympics. The lead character, Umi, is the closest child of a family in a moderately sized town who works for her grandmother's boarding house. Her father was a military man who died in the Korean War years ago, but Umi still hangs up flags to guide him home every morning, and her mother is usually away on work. So Umi, being the eldest child, has been parentified as fuck, poor kid. Through a mishap, she meets a boy named Shun, who is a member of the newspaper club that is trying to save the clubhouse from being torn down. Umi and her friends end up getting involved in the restoration of the Latin Quarter, and you can see why they want to save it so badly. It's just such a beautiful old building. This really speaks to me personally as someone from Nova Scotia. In Halifax, there's tons of old historical buildings that, had they not been deemed historical buildings, would have been demolished for some glass colossus by the Conservative Party years ago. So their preservation means Halifax has this mix of old and new buildings everywhere, and it makes the city look positively gorgeous. So Umi and Shun's desire to preserve these rickety old buildings is something I am invested in from the word go, because these buildings have a character to them and a charm that a lot of people would miss if they were gone. In essence, the film is almost anti-gentrification, but more for the sake of preserving history than economic reasons.
You're just like the old men who run this country! Dumb and enamored with the new!
It's interesting to see preservation and respect for history framed as a youth issue, as in stories it's often attributed to the older generations. From Up on Poppy Hill is actually more true to life in this regard, as young people tend to get really invested in old shit all the time. I mean, look at all the videos of Gen Alpha kids losing their minds exploring things like rotary phones and cassette players. I mean, we're going through a vinyl revival, for crying out loud, as people realize that perhaps old stuff doesn't need to immediately be tossed aside for the sake of modernity. The two children, Umi and Shun, develop a strong friendship that eventually turns into very strong feelings for one another. Unfortunately, this otherwise cute youth romance gets a massive spike wedged into it when it turns out that Umi and Shun might actually have the same father.
It's like a cheap melodrama.
God, that just fucking sucks. To start building a relationship only for that to come in and blindside you. The worst part is this is something that happens in real life, just not usually this early in a relationship. Sure, they're young and they could easily move on and find other people, but that doesn't change the fact that this has to fucking hurt. I don't think I've ever wanted to see a kid in an animated film get a hug more than this. Someone please give Umi a hug. She is going through it. Shun makes this rather practical remark of,
I guess we stop feeling how we feel.
Yeah, easier said than done, bozo. For both of them, this is just supreme levels of awkwardness because you can't just turn off feelings that took time to develop in the first place. And aside from that, there's just the general fuck you in particular from fate that can't be ignored. Like, this is the kind of thing that would give a person paranoia for the rest of their life. When Umi's mother comes home, Umi actually goes to ask if any of this is true, and in the process completely breaks down. Oh, thank God someone hugged this poor child. The worst part is Umi's mother genuinely has no idea if they're related or not, because she just never considered the possibility that her husband could have had an affair. He just showed up with a kid insisting they had to adopt him because his parents passed away, but then they gave him to another family who could actually take care of him. Someone please give this baby some answers. Even winning a victory over the school and getting to keep the clubhouse ends up being a hollow victory for poor Umi because of all of this. Thankfully, Umi's mother calls Shun's adoptive father. He'd previously been unwilling to discuss Shun's parentage because Shun is his kid, but after hearing about what's happening between Shun and Umi, gets a hold of the third man in the photo, who explains to them that no, they are in fact not related. Shun and Umi have the same father registered in City Hall because Umi's father had legally adopted him before even talking to his wife about it. All this drama caused by one impulsive man's paperwork, thanks dickhead. I feel like this is a film that either makes or breaks entirely on how much you're inclined to performatively gag. If you're someone who devolves into a string of Alabama and Game of Thrones jokes when a film barely skirts alongside this topic, yeah, this is going to be one of the weirder Ghibli films. But if you're someone who is willing to walk with the film to that pier, and you're someone who sympathizes with the often petty struggles of children, then it could be a very cute, very heartfelt, and very emotional film. Sure, the second half plot is weird, but I'd argue that little weirdnesses and dramas like this are just part of life. It's one of those stories an old couple would tell about the bizarre circumstances in which they met, to their absolutely gobsmacked grandchildren. You can feel the frustration on them as they try to get a definitive answer like, can we fucking date or not? Oh my god, this is so stressful. This is just genuinely heartwarming and sweet, and really highlights the way in which the wars of the 20th century affected military families. Genuinely sweet and surprisingly good. Like, I'm struggling where to put this on the ranking, but it's certainly fucking up there.
Oh, daughter, haven't I taught you to forgive and to forget? And if your father's sown his oats, well, still you needn't fret. Your father may be father to all the boys in town, and still he's not the one who sired you, so marry whom you will.
The Wind Rises was supposed to be Hayao Miyazaki's magnum opus, as he retired shortly after making it. Unfortunately, nothing short of the Grim Reaper himself can keep him out of the director's chair, as he would return again and again and again to make more films. You know, at this point, everyone just needs to accept he's not going to quit until he's dead. The Wind Rises is a romanticized biopic of Jiro Horikoshi, a Japanese aeronautical engineer who designed a lot of fighter planes that were used during World War II. Given how much Miyazaki loves planes, a film about a designer of a plane was almost a guarantee. The film follows Horikoshi's life as he graduates college and gets a job designing planes for Mitsubishi during the Great Depression, before being transferred to Germany to work on bomber designs before traveling the world to study and work on new planes. While he's doing this, he occasionally has dreamscape encounters with Giovanni Caproni, who laments the warlike nature of his and Jiro's profession. More planes are designed and purchased by the army than the travel industry, and while they both want to make beautiful planes, their creations are doomed to become weapons of death. Around the three-quarter point, the film ends up focusing on Jiro's design and development of the A6M0, a Japanese carrier plane that, when it was developed, was the most capable fighter plane in the world, and is to the Japanese military what Geneva's checklist was to the Canadians. There's also a running plot throughout the film of Jiro's romance with a woman named Nahoko, a painter who he meets during his travels and who is suffering from a terminal case of tuberculosis. The third act of the film is centered almost entirely around Jiro trying and failing to balance his limited time with his wife and his work on the Zero. And that's quite literally it. The Wind Rises is a very weird film because this was supposed to be Miyazaki's swan song, the last film he made before retiring, and much like The Tale of Princess Kaguya was for Takahata, they both came out the same year actually. Because of this, it got swept up in a lot of praise and expectations of universal acclaim, with a lot of people insisting that it should have won Best Animated Feature at the Oscars, which, while nominated, it lost to Frozen. And after having seen the film, that loss was completely and utterly fair. The Wind Rises is fucking terrible. Not only is it a very dull film about a dull man with a dull passion and his dull wife, but the film engages in a level of whitewashing not seen since the live-action Avatar film. The film is almost exclusively focused on a man whose only passion in life is to make beautiful planes. There's a big focus in the beginning on how passenger planes are where true aeronautical artists belong rather than the military, but Jiro ends up working for the military anyway, building planes that will ultimately go on to kill many people in the name of an imperialist regime whose crimes against humanity are rivaled only by the Soviet Union and the Nazis. Indeed, the Nazis are a regular presence in the film, with Jiro largely shrugging his shoulders at their involvement in his projects. The problem comes down to the fact that the film largely washes its hands of the whole affair. Jiro makes his masterpiece and he simply does not care what it will be used for, and he doesn't feel any degree of responsibility for the lives that will be taken with it. I wasn't sure what the polar opposite of Now I Am Become Death, Destroyer of Worlds was was, but we just found it. The way the film positions artistry over everything else leaves me feeling unclean by the end. It's one of those films that runs adjacent to the notion that artists hold no responsibility for the art they create, something I have always vehemently disagreed with. The characters, and indeed the film itself, just put their fingers in their ears to focus on the pretty airplanes. In terms of Ghibli films about World War II, this is such a swerve from Grave of the Fireflies, which immerses you in the horrors of planes bombing civilian targets and chastises you for expecting anything to soften the blow. The edges have been so thoroughly filed down from Horikoshi's life, all in the name of fueling Miyazaki's desire to admire famous planes, and it is just fucking gross. I ultimately came away from this film with a decidedly worse opinion of Hayao Miyazaki, and if I'm being completely honest, perhaps he should have stayed in retirement where he fucking belonged.
Is this Nutsy land so good? Would you leave it if you could? Yeah, this Nutsy land is good. We would leave it if we could. We bring the world new order. I'll this world new order. Everyone of foreign race will love the purer space when we bring to the world disorder.
The Tale of Princess Kaguya is the last film ever directed by Isao Takahata. Not the last one he ever worked on, that was The Red Turtle, but the last he ever directed. Kaguya is an interesting film specifically because it occupies a very strange nexus, where you need to know someone pretty well to consider recommending it to them, but at the same time, it is the greatest animated film ever made, ever. It has absolutely no equal in quality. The reason you have to know someone very well to recommend it is because all of Takahata's signatures of filmmaking are here. The film is extremely long and in many cases isn't afraid to be boring to get the point across. And like most Takahata films, it romanticizes rural life while portraying urban life as a suffocating mire of formality and misery and inhuman facades. While I was working on this, I was listening to Jello Apocalypse talk about all the Ghibli films on Patreon, and he talked specifically about how this film is way too long and the story could have easily been told in 20 minutes. Now, I don't begrudge Jello for this kind of take. I've been watching his videos long enough and have enjoyed his work long enough to know he doesn't like slow stories, so of course he feels this way. But while the simple facts of the plot could be conveyed in 20 minutes, the emotions of the lead character could not. Much of the plot is around how the overly formal and misogynistic society of Japan has sucked every last ounce of joy out of this girl's life. It has taken her friends away, taken away the things she loves doing, told her she can't have her hobbies or her garden. Her father gets on her case when she's in the kitchen spending time with her mother. There is a soul-crushing misery in her life that needs time to really sink in and envelop the viewer. I'm getting ahead of myself. The Tale of Princess Kaguya is an adaptation of The Tale of the Bamboo Cutter, albeit one that's altered to suit Takahata's persistent themes about societal expectations versus individual happiness. It's a story about a girl from the moon descending to Earth to learn what it's like to live as a human. She's found inside of a bamboo stalk by a bamboo cutter who takes her home and adopts her. She lives a full life from infancy to adulthood, growing through her childhood extremely quickly. Out of the desire to give his adoptive daughter what he believes is the best possible life, something that any parent could really relate to, Kaguya's father takes the gold he finds in a bamboo stalk and uses it to build her a palace in Nara so that she can live like a princess. However, what her father doesn't realize is that while the city and nobility is a wonderful life for men, it isn't a wonderful life for women, who are married off and treated like property to be collected. The film doesn't pull its punches, as even at the age of 13, Kaguya is perved on and pursued by men her father's age.
I must confess that the moment I stood before Princess Kaguya, this old man's body began to tremble as if a dry fountain had come flowing back to life.
Ugh, that old man needs to be burned. Someone please burn him. An important part of the story is how Kaguya sends her would-be suitors on impossible tasks to collect rare and valuable objects, to which all of them attempt to bring fakes to fool her. In the film, the suitors all compared her to these objects, which is what provokes Kaguya to demand that they find these relics, and what confirms their disrespect of her is when they attempt to deceive her with fakes.
I'm sure that's all I am to those gentlemen.
What?
I'm a fake jeweled branch, or a fire-wrapped fur robe that turns to ashes.
A major difference from the story is actually very powerful. One of the suitors, rather than returning with a fake relic, returns with a wildflower and spins a tale about how it represents nature's very beauty itself. Kaguya actually starts feeling moved by this, until the prince's wife stops him and reveals that he had said those very same words to many women who'd felt similarly stifled and suffocated by societal expectations. In truth, the symbolism of the wildflower is reversed. It is plucked for its beauty, but swiftly thrown away as it is no different, no more cherished than any of the other millions of wildflowers on the side of the road. No more valuable than the wildflowers you stepped on to reach it. It emphasizes the way these men view women. Objects to possess for their beauty, but to be swiftly discarded when they either age or their novelty becomes stale to them. Indeed, what is Kaguya if not a flower taken from her grove and placed into a vase to be admired from her beauty, and thus doomed to wilt and wither away and be discarded without a second thought? Her relationship with the Emperor is similarly changed. In the original tale, she rebuffs his proposals, but the two ultimately become something akin to friends, and she gifts him a vial granting him immortality, which he doesn't drink. In the film, she completely rebuffs his advances, only for him to become insistent. In the film, the Emperor is rewritten into such a scumbag that they went and got an actual human trash can to voice him.
Let's waste no more time with games.
Why are you doing this?
Kaguya rebuffs his advances only for him to become more insistent, and that insistent tips her despair over the edge and is the point where she returns to the moon. Much of the otherworldliness of the original tale is downplayed, and the stark contrast between the Moon City and Earth is the contrast between life and death. The people of the moon all have very Buddhist imagery to them, with Buddha himself even making an appearance in the flesh. They have all achieved complete and total detachment from the world, viewing the Earth itself as impure. But even in the face of her mounting misery, Kaguya doesn't want to leave, because even the bad parts of life is better than feeling nothing. The moon people are directly compared to the way feudal Japanese society expects women to behave, showing little emotion, barely moving, being an ornament to be admired, being something less than human. The film portrays returning to the moon involving Kaguya being relieved of her memories, of losing everything she is as a person, and becoming that detached, empty husk to forever leave this world, never to return. The film is not subtle about what's going on here. Kaguya's otherworldly powers from the original tale are downplayed, her effects on men around her being little more than their own violent misogyny, and instead of being found by the people of the moon...
And when His Majesty grabbed me, in panic, my heart just screamed out, I don't want to be here anymore.
The tale of Princess Kaguya is not about an otherworldly being who descends to Earth and eventually has to return to the place she came. It's about a girl ripped from her happy childhood, forced to conform to a stifling set of gender roles. It's preyed on night and day by men who views her as an object, and who becomes so unhappy, her life so bereft of joy, that she can't take it anymore and kills herself. And just in case you thought maybe I'm reading too much into that...
Papa, if your happiness depends on wearing the cap of a court official, then I will go to His Majesty as you wish. And after you have put on that cap as part of the court, I will kill myself.
In the Spirited Away section, I mentioned the persistent conspiracy theory that pops up every few years that insists that Spirited Away is actually a metaphor for the scourge of child prostitution. Fascinating theory, specifically because it's trying to find hidden meaning among a film from a studio that has historically never traded in that kind of metaphor. The heavier a Ghibli film is, the more grounded it becomes. Even if they do engage in metaphor, they're not afraid to come out and tell you exactly what they're about. The themes that play in Ghibli's work are ones that you have never needed to take a film studies course to appreciate because they are so direct.
It's the way it should be. The anger of the Om reflects the anger of the Earth. The Earth knows it's wrong for us to survive if we have to depend on a monster like that.
You can't survive outside of the system. Just swallow your pride and apologize to her.
Ghibli films are many things, but subtle has never been one of them. And the tale of Princess Kaguya is the capstone of that philosophy, because what little metaphor is actually made is complemented by telling you explicitly what they mean when they say this. There can be no doubt in anyone that Kaguya going to the moon is a fantastical, whimsical sheet placed over Kaguya committing suicide. This film actually does something that no other film has ever done, and that's talk about suicide openly and honestly. The uncomfortable truth many don't want to face is that in the vast majority of cases, the causes of suicide are external. Things have happened to this person that has rendered their life so devoid of joy that it is no longer worth living. As a child, I struggled with suicidal thoughts almost daily, and attempted it 3 times. And my parents and sister tried everything that they thought could keep me off the ledge. What none of them were willing to accept was that they were the reason I wanted my life to end.
I don't want to be here anymore.
In the same way, Kaguya's father is directly responsible for her unhappiness. Though he desires to give his daughter the best life possible, that vision of what the best life looks like is shaped by the violently patriarchal social hierarchy he lives in. He never once asks her what she actually wants. He simply assumes she must live as a proper lady and marry a nobleman because that's what any woman should want. But it's not what Kaguya wants. She wants to go home, live her simple life with her simple friends, and enjoy the simple pleasures of life. I feel this is the part of Takahata's films that is the most contentious, because Takahata romanticizes the fuck out of country life. And most people my age tend to idolize urban living. But I find it very relatable because as a child I spent a lot of time running around in the woods because I grew up in a rural area, and it was one of the few pleasures I had in life. As an adult, I hate big cities. I've been to Toronto twice, and the best part about it was when I left. I've been to New York City, and I never ever want to visit it ever again. Cities are hot and stifling and packed with too many people. My dream is to live in a cottage in the forest and never be seen by another mortal soul for the rest of my life. So when Takahata starts equating the countryside with freedom, I am so on board with this. I'm personally more appreciative of forests than farms. My wife says I'm basically an elf, lol, but the vibe is the same. So Kaguya's desire to return to her mountain, to her friends, to her simple life resonates so hard with me, as does her suicidal despair coming from the very simple and understandable place that life no longer brings her any joy. But in that sense, it's also honest about death. When Kaguya returns, she loses her memory. She doesn't take herself with her. Kaguya doesn't exist anymore. The only part of her that does is the memories of her held by those who loved her. It's right there in the song she sings. Death isn't anything. It is simply an end. The afterlife, if there even is one, is a cold and lonely place. You, as you are, simply cease to exist as anything but a memory. The final sequence does nothing to hide this, even as an entire procession carries Kaguya back to the moon. The colors fade and wash out, and soon even they fade away and vanish, and the music does everything it can to hammer in the totality of Kaguya's suicide while still adhering to the basic plot of the original tale. It's always a risk to describe a film as being able to make you cry, because then very contrary people will go in and be really difficult with it, but this is the best animated film ever made. It is completely without equal. Its themes are moving and beautiful and horrific and sad. It is a film that will make you coo and delight at the adorable BB in the first hour and then break your heart as she is made more and more miserable. It will stoke feelings in you didn't know a film was capable of. I was fucked up after this movie. Watch it. It is beautiful.
There's no one who can interfere, no one to get in my way here. Taking off my dark green cardigan, fixing my hair just even once. This petite girl, short as can be, is gonna jump now and be free.
When Marnie Was There is a film that holds a rather amusing status of being the only animated film to successfully gay bait the entire fucking world. When Marnie Was There is about Anna, an asthmatic emo whose mother was clearly married to Isao Takahata because she tells her, "You're too sad, I'm banishing you to the countryside so you can have a whimsical coming-of-age adventure." While in the countryside, Anna spends much of her time failing to socialize, sketching, avoiding all human contact, and having mental breakdowns on the shoreline until she meets and befriends a girl named Marnie, who talks about Anna being her precious secret that others would spoil if they found out about her. Okay, come on, Yonbayashi, you knew what you were doing.
Well, in that case, may I have this dance? Look for me again, Anna, and don't tell anyone our precious secret.
Seriously, this film is just the fucking most. Much of the film is these two spending time together, with Marnie being extremely emphatic about how much she cares about Anna and playing a question game that slowly reveals their backstories. Anna deals with self-loathing from feeling unwanted because she believes she's a burden on everyone. Her parents were killed when she was little and she was being raised by her grandmother before her grandmother unexpectedly died as well. She was then snubbed by much of her extended family before finally ending up with a foster mother who she saw getting a welfare check for taking care of her, which left her feeling unwanted. This is only emphasized by the fact that she's been sent away to her foster mother's relatives for her health, which Anna takes to mean, "Get away from me." Now, already the film has an extremely massive hurdle to overcome. Anna is a monotone, miserable, socially neutered husk of a character, and the reason why she's like this doesn't get explained until about the third act. This means Anna can be borderline insufferable for most of the film, especially if you're someone who already finds teenage girls to be the most annoying thing ever. She's rude, she lashes out at people, she gives other children the cold shoulder, and even when people are interested in being friends with her, she largely blows them off to either go go draw alone or go on another flight of fancy with Marnie. I've talked to people who absolutely hate this film because Anna is such a grating presence in the story. For my part, I already knew all the third act spoilers before seeing it for the first time, so Anna was a lot easier to stomach, but at the same time I found her character deeply unsatisfying. Self-loathing is a very difficult character arc to sell, especially when you hold the reason for the self-loathing back from the viewer for so long. The Owl House had the same problem in its final season, with Luce going through a self-loathing arc that sidesteps nearly every chance to actually talk about it for over an hour. Marnie, meanwhile, is a girl who lives in the nearby mansion. Her mother and father are away often, and she's abused by her nanny and maids. Marnie phrases it in such a way as to suggest that she's never told her parents, only Anna. The big secret revealed at the end of the film is that Marnie's struggles didn't end after she left. She lost her husband, became so depressed that she had to send her daughter to boarding school, which destroyed their relationship. Her daughter eventually died in an accident and she took in her granddaughter, but the stress and grief killed her a year later. Marnie's been dead for 10 years. She's actually Anna's grandmother. Then the film hastily wraps up all of Anna's story and then it's over. Marnie's story actually overshadows Anna's the instant she appears. Anna becomes so fixated on Marnie, and it's unclear whether this is Marnie's ghost or just Anna's memory-induced hallucinations. As a result, the actual resolution to Anna's story feels deeply unsatisfying because it has to be tied up so quickly. That being said, the best moment of the entire film is toward the very end. Anna has been referring to her foster mother as her guardian the entire film, but toward the end, when she introduces her to Asako, she says,
"And this is my mother."
And you know what? Despite everything wrong with Anna's character and how her story is written, this moment right here wrung tears out of me, so fine, you get to have a high grade. The unfortunate reality about this film is that the most interesting thing about it is how it was marketed. Lots of clips of Marnie and Anna's friendship where they go on a rowboat date, talk about how important they are to each other, and Marnie calling Anna her precious secret led a lot of people to believe that Ghibli was making a sapphic romance. I remember when this film was being advertised, I saw people losing their minds over the fact that Studio Ghibli was going gay, and then the film came out and everyone went very quiet. And having seen the film, they really lay the romantic imagery on thick with Marnie and Anna. To be fair, this also happened in the original book, but nobody bought the original book, except Yambayashi, it seems. The chance of your girlfriend turning out to be the ghost of your grandmother is low, but never zero. Okay, so the red turtle is a weird one. It's a completely silent, well, almost completely silent film about a man being shipwrecked on a desert island and trying to engineer his escape. During the process, he meets a mysterious red turtle who keeps destroying his rafts. In a rage, he flips the turtle over to let it die in the hot sun, but after about a day comes to regret his decision and tries to bring it back to life. However, the turtle then turns into a human woman. The two bond, which results in the man no longer wanting to leave the island, and instead he stays there with the turtle and the two end up raising a child together. Yep. Turtle fucking. The film then follows them as their son grows up into a man and eventually leaves the island, and the two grow old together until the man dies and she turns back into a turtle and swims back into the sea. Now, there are a number of ways someone could approach this film. It could be from a thematic standpoint, how this film paints a picture of someone trying to fight against the tide of mortality, and how ultimately we're forced to merely take what life throws at us and try to find the positive in our situation. Or from an artistic lens, covering the sheer amount of visual storytelling and the bold direction to tell a story with no dialogue. However, I'm going to do neither of things. I've decided to have a mental breakdown instead. So this turtle right here, this turtle is a fucking sociopath. All this guy wants to do is get off this desert island, and this absolute monster completely destroys his raft 3 goddamn times. This was targeted. And then this little shit fuck crawls onto the beach like she's not expecting him to flip her over. I'd have done that were I in his position. Absolutely warranted response. The turtle seems like she's dead, but she's not. She's just fucking playing dead, and she plays dead just long enough for the guilt to sink in and the trauma bonding begins. Once she turns into a human woman, she's aloof and disinterested, as if to tempt him with the thought of actual human contact. Except it's not. It's a fucking turtle. So once they get together, bam, she's got him. She's got him in her disgusting little fins. And then we see their kids. What is that? turtle rape. I thought only dolphins did that, but apparently sea turtles can too. This turtle, this fucking turtle, straight up stole this man's life. She possessively stops him from leaving the island, baby traps him, and keeps him there on the island until he dies of old age. Any life he had before this, any family or loved ones, he never sees them again. And when he's dead, she just turns back into a turtle and goes back into the ocean, presumably to entomb some other weary traveler. This is a siren. This is what sirens do. This is a horror movie. The Red Turtle is about a psychopathic turtle that drags marooned men to their deaths for her own sick amusement. 10 out of 10.
If a little gator, whose name was Gator Ted, climbed inside a turtle shell and ate a loaf of bread, the shell would make him snappy, and he would eat some more. Alligator snapping turtles can eat at grocery store. Turtles come from the Amazon, Asia, and the Western Pond. Stink body's another one. Turtles are my friends.
Earwig and the Witch is the third film directed by Goro Miyazaki and based off the book of the same name. It follows the story of Earwig, a little girl abandoned by her mother on the doorstep of an orphanage while she tries to shake off a coven of evil witches. Years later, she gets adopted by another witch who intends to use her as slave labor, while Earwig keeps trying to get her to teach her magic. This proves to not work, so Earwig starts working to circumvent the witch's magic and hopefully escape from the cage that is her magic cottage. As a character, Earwig is the epitome of indignance. Not one moment goes by without her saying, "This is bullshit." She's absurdly confident, even when she's getting a karmic bat to the back of the head for most of the film. Early in the film, the witch who adopts her tells her to mind her own business if she knows what's good for her, and Earwig goes, "Oh? What if I don't? What's she gonna do about it, bitch?" With a big grin on her face. She is a little shit, and I love her. She is a manic, evil little goblin who starts conspiring against her abusive foster mother and studying magic to enact violent karma. It's like they took John McClane and compressed him into an evil little girl.
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
Professional witch here is getting outdone by someone who is self-teaching curses. Like, if you go to adopt a child and you're an abusive evil shit, they give you this one. The best part is that the witch's husband, patron, I don't know. This guy has a hair temper and doesn't like to be disturbed, but every time Earwig does something to piss him off, his anger is directed solely at the witch, something Earwig completely fucking exploits. Turns out Earwig's mother, the witch, and this guy were all part of a rock band together, and probably also a polycule, before they broke up because of the aforementioned 12 angry witches. Unfortunately, the film is lacking a proper ending. After pissing off what's-his-face, Earwig exploits better conditions and eventually takes over the fucking house. Oh my god. But the film just kinda ends? I looked it up, and apparently that's because the original book was the same way, as Diane Jones really rushed like hell to finish it because she was, you know, dying, and that's about it. Earwig and the Witch was already working at an extreme disadvantage because it's a CG film from Studio Ghibli. A big part of Ghibli's enduring popularity is that they're one of the few remaining animated studios that actually still does 2D animation that sells well and reviews well, while every other 2D film is either condemned to the streaming ghetto from the outset or carries the nebulous title of sold really well but reviewed like shit. So Studio Ghibli doing a 3D film is like a portent of doom for some people, and there's a strong incentive to violently and viciously reject it in the hopes that Ghibli will reverse course, which they did. And a lot of critics were right in that the 3D animation is pitched deep in the uncanny valley. Being their first fully 3D film, a lot of the animation techniques that work in a 2D film just don't work here. The animation process for 3D is more involved, more expensive, and less resistant to failure. However, I don't critique animation unless it is painfully distracting. I'm always in the core working the story and characters to death. Earwig's animation didn't look like absolute garbage, and it didn't give me motion sickness, so it gets a thumbs up from me. The story is weak, but that's not unique among Ghibli films, but the characterization of the main character is so fucking strong. I am living for what an evil little maniac this girl is. This kid gets adopted into an abusive household and has made her adoptive parents her bitch in 6 months. This girl would look at Harry and say, fucking skill issue. The Boy and the Heron is the film that was never actually supposed to be made. After The Wind Rises, Miyazaki went into retirement, where he proceeded to paint and talk about why the anime industry is a festering hive of incels and nationalists.
No, He's got a point.
Unfortunately, when faced with the reality that retirement means spending time with his family, he raced back to the studio to start work on The Boy and the Heron, meaning he spent a total of 3 years in retirement. Starting in 2016, the film was in development hell for 7 years, with Miyazaki almost getting sidetracked by Earwig and the Witch, until some of the studio escorted him back to his chair. It wasn't until 2023 that the film finally saw the light of day to a decidedly mixed reception. The film opens with an air raid siren, as if to say, strap in while I strap on, viewer. The main character's mother is killed and he and his father abandon Tokyo because that place is a firebomb magnet. His father remarries and he begins a new life in the countryside, albeit stricken with grief and lethargy. While exploring his new home, he finds a strange tower built by his stepmother's great uncle, who lost his mind and vanished one day, and the tower was sealed up because it was too dangerous to go into. So the boy, Mahito, is told to stay away from the tower, something he very clearly will not do. Amidst all this, he has to deal with the ravings of a heron, voiced by Robert Pattinson.
The one we have all been waiting for has appeared at last.
Yeah, that sounds like something he'd do. The heron, and indeed all the animals in the pond, want Mahito to go on a magical adventure to rescue his mother, who is actually not dead. And how convenient it is that all of this is happening at exactly the moment one would be expected to go through a massive grief-induced mental breakdown. At one point, his stepmother, who is also his maternal aunt, goes missing. Wait a minute, hold on, hold the phone. His stepmother is his maternal aunt. So let me get this straight here. Your sister dies, you marry her widower, try to take over as paternal figure for her son, while having a kid with his father. Natsuko, are you okay? Do you need to talk to someone? Anyway, his aunt goes missing, and so Mahito, having heard before that his mother is actually alive, goes in looking for her. His mother's survival turns out to be a trick by the heron, and so the adventure is on to find and rescue Natsuko. One of the maids, either de-aged or displaced in time, or a fragment of the spirit lost at, I don't fucking know, joins Mahito on his adventure as a burly sailor named Kiriko. Or it might not be the same Kiriko. I don't fucking know. Anyway, this new realm is a cursed land of death and decay and death and misery. All who come here inevitably perish without the power of main character. As Mahito ventures deeper into the shady gray, he encounters a woman named Hime, who claims Natsuko as her sister. Wait, the bird wasn't lying? Okay. Anyway, Hime claims that Natsuko doesn't want to leave as she's about to have her baby. They find her at the bottom of a cavern, asleep in a bed, and about to go into labor. But when Mahito wakes her up, she screams at him to leave and that she hates him. As should be obvious by this point, the deeper you go into this mysterious land, the more you are consumed by grief. Natsuko was so consumed by grief, she tried to channel that grief into caring for her nephew, but her nephew, in his own grief, rebuffed her, and so she sunk deeper into the sad feelings back rooms to wither away. After discovering that there's no bringing his mother back, Mahito is completely focused on finding his aunt. But the problem is he's just doing the same thing. Instead of dealing with his grief, he's ignoring it. Even as he searches for his aunt, he's sinking deeper and deeper into despair, continuing to lose himself as his inner demons try to eat him alive. Literally. When Mahito finds his granduncle, he tries to get him to take over his role of sitting at the bottom of the misery pit, making sure the misery pit doesn't collapse in on itself. But after an entire film's worth of character development, Mahito doesn't want to wallow in grief and self-pity, and says he's taking his mother and leaving, referring to Natsuko this time. They leave, Hime returns to her time to become Mahito's mother and inevitably die in a fire, and the others make it back home just before the tower collapses and destroys the misery pit along with it. Mahito accepts Natsuko as his mother, and they return home to live a happy life. Earlier in the video, I remarked on how Ghibli's films tend to eschew subtext and symbolism to just be explicitly about what they're about. The Boy and the Heron throws that out the fucking window, as the film is packed with so much symbolism, you need a goddamn reference guide sprawled across your thighs to tell you that the pattern of the clouds at 36 minutes and 17 seconds in is actually in the shape of loss. No, really, pause the video and go check, I'll wait. Made you look, bitch. Anyway, I'm in two minds about this. It's certainly effective at communicating the way in which people lose themselves in grief, but on the other hand, I'd find the film more moving if Mahito and his aunt had spent more time together working through their grief the old-fashioned way. Instead, the film is mostly a boy's adventure through his boy pain. The thing is, the film is laden with people not working through their grief. The entire family is not coping well with Hisako's death. Shoichi and Natsuko are both married their sibling-in-law, for crying out loud. Nothing screams not handling this well quite like that, but instead this is glossed over and focusing entirely on Mahito dealing with his grief in the most roundabout way possible. This is why I've always had an adversarial relationship with metaphor as a storytelling tool, because I like to explore things and metaphor is often used to gloss over things instead of exploring them. It's certainly good, but I'm left wanting. I also don't really like how Mahito's character development involves accepting Natsuko as his mother, as if it's impossible to move on while letting your loving aunt be your loving aunt. I actually watched The Boy and the Heron last, hoping I'd have a lot to say about it, but I just don't. Like, yep, that's what it's about, and And we're done. Now this is where the elephant in the room comes in. Miyazaki has been vocal for a long time about how the anime industry has been quietly rotting for decades, both in terms of artistry, where everything has gotten softer and more placid-faced, and female characters are increasingly looking like they've been subjected to the same genetic damage as a pug, but also in terms of writing, as more people get into the industry whose backgrounds are simply being fans of anime, and so the industry cycles the same formulas and genres without any thematic weight or anything to say, taking what worked in the 80s and 90s and continuing to recycle it over and over again until, well, you saw the pug, didn't you? I bring this up because, well, that's a reality about the anime industry that is currently speeding towards Ghibli on a freight train. Takahata's already dead and Miyazaki is 85 years old, and both the output of Studio Ponok and Earwig and the Witch have shown that without them, Ghibli will start cannibalizing its old work and repackaging the same tropes and familiar plots, doing what the rest of the anime industry has done up to this point, and just continue playing the hits. And despite being made by the original auteur himself, this is not something The Boy and the Heron actually escapes. The film is riding the coattails of Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle, and Princess Kaguya, strangely enough, and I think it captures how I feel about Miyazaki's films as a whole. His films are good, but barring a few exceptions, that's about all they are. Of the 5 best Ghibli films, only one is directed by him, and it's not the one you're thinking of. Although I have to step back and consider that maybe it's my critical perspective that causes this. If you've been watching the entire video and reading the grade cards, you'll notice in that, barring a few notable exceptions, I almost never include the animation itself into my critique. I'm deep in the core, focusing on story, characters, and themes. I said this in the last segment. Part of this is because I'm visually impaired, so I can never 100% trust what I see on a screen, but also because I don't consider the animation itself a core aspect of a film, the same way I don't consider cinematography when critiquing a live-action film. I'm a writer, I critique the story, but Miyazaki is an animator first and foremost, and the animation plays a major part of the process for him. His films are as much paintings as they are stories. I feel this is why I viewed The Wind Rises in such contempt. I'm not looking at the beautiful landscapes or how the wind is animated, I'm looking at the story and the story alone, which doesn't reflect well on the film at all. People can vary on whether or not they think this is a valid way to critique a film, but it ultimately ends up meaning that good animation doesn't save poor writing, and bad animation doesn't condemn good writing. My only bar for the animation is don't give me motion sickness, but it does mean a large part of what draws people to Miyazaki's work just has never really been part of the equation for me. And The Boy and the Heron is where this has felt the hardest. I'm almost certainly not being fair to it, but those are the cards we're dealt, I guess.
What a bird, bird, bird. A bird is a word. What don't you know about the bird?
Yeah, everybody's heard that the bird's a word.
Oh, well, a bird, bird, bird. A bird's a word. Well, a bird, bird, bird. But a bird is a word.
Part of the reason I wanted to do this project was because the discussion about serious and adult animation never ends, and Ghibli is the studio that's most frequently brought up around it, simultaneously making serious adult animation while also keeping hand-drawn animation alive. But the further I got into this, the less I wanted to really talk about that aspect of animation discourse. Maybe in a less scripted video, but at the moment I'm not sure. As I got further through the films, I found myself just captivated by the way Ghibli in particular emphasizes the importance of auteurism, how the director truly is the lifeblood of a film, and how creators think and behave. In the modern day, fandom is all too ready to put the studio in the position of importance, both in the positive and the negative, and often fails to comprehend why studios turn away from films they used to make and into new directions. That reason usually being a director with different inspirations and experiences. Some people have acted like there's some grand conspiracy at play when a company like Disney or Pixar starts making films that are different from the films they used to make, but the simple reality is that other people made them and have different things they like to think about. But it's not like the Renaissance or male angst films, so people get cranky. Ghibli only escapes this because so much of their catalog is dominated by one director. A lot of people don't know who actually makes the things they enjoy. Animation is among the worst for this, just after the video game industry, and Ghibli doesn't escape this. There are a lot of people who don't even know other directors exist and think Miyazaki makes everything they produce, if they even know who he is. And the sad thing is that outside of Takahata, the other directors just didn't get to make enough films to really see what inspires them. Except Jan Bayashi, he really likes British literature. So with that rumination out of the way, let's get to the ranking. Number 24, The Wind Rises. The Wind Rises is the worst for the way it shrugs off Horikoshi's involvement in crimes against humanity. That the film presents this as just the artist wanting to make beautiful planes no matter the cost, and expects people to be okay with that is a level of artistic tunnel vision that I find disgusting. I don't know how many artists would actually be so blasé about their work being used to kill people, even if you believe blame doesn't go to the artist for what people do with their work. Artists are still heartbroken when their work is used to harm people. Ironically, Horikoshi himself was a callous ruthless individual who shrugged at the harm his creations caused, but the film presenting that without commentary is disgusting, especially when Miyazaki emphasized this in interviews later. Even without the sheer audacity on display, The Wind Rises is just utterly, completely dull. Number 23, Tales from Earthsea. Everything was moving against this film from the start. Brand new director being handed an absolutely monstrous project and being expected to adapt 4 books into one film. It's a miracle that Earthsea turned out to just be boring. It could have been a lot worse, but then again, I don't think it could have been much better. I don't consider the Earthsea books to be amazing works of literature like some other people do. Number 22, Pom Poko. Unremarkable justification here, Takahata's other films just do it better. Number 21, My Neighbor Totoro. I gave it a C, so it's not bad, but something has to be near the bottom. Rankings are deceptive by design because after Totoro, everything else has a relatively high grade, but arranged from worst to best makes them look like I'm positioning them lower than they actually are. Number 20, Howl's Moving Castle. Howl's Moving Castle is certainly a pretty film, but in terms of story, I'm left very wanting. It's one of those Ghibli films where you really need to be on board for pretty animation over story, and I'm just not. Number 19, Castle in the Sky. I was struggling what to say here about Castle in the Sky, and I had the same problem in its own segment. Okay, that sure was a castle in the sky. I like what it has to say about power and responsibility, but sadly a lot of its better ideas are held back by virtue of being an adaptation of Gulliver's Travels. Number 18, My Neighbors the Yamadas. Probably not a good idea to watch this as part of a marathon, but I went back after finishing all the films and watched it while I was playing Tales of Fantasia, and found myself enjoying it a lot more. It's a shame it bombed so hard that Takahata retired from directing for a decade. Number 17, Earwig and the Witch. I understand why people lashed out so severely at the idea of Ghibli going full CGI, but I still consider this film unfairly maligned. The protagonist carries it, and I would gladly watch a sequel where she terrorizes some other poor sod. Number 16, Princess Mononoke. It's Nausicaa again, but not as good and Shinto flavored. Time has not been good to Princess Mononoke, as Ashitaka's approach to conflict has been repeated again and again and again, and he doesn't even have the advantage of first installment wins, because Aang is just a much better character than him. Number 15, When Marnie Was There. I was so ready to give this film a bad grade, but then it brought out the tears. On a second watch later on the project, I found myself appreciating it more and more, and upping its grade from a C+ to a B. I'm sure if I watch it again, I'll find more things to like about it, but I'm keeping it where it is. Number 14, The Red Turtle. 1, 2, 3, 4, codependent turtle fucking! Number 13, Kiki's Delivery Service. I like Kiki, but sadly I can't really resonate with her story as much as many others can, as I've done everything possible to avoid burnout, but it's good for a summer afternoon if you're feeling lazy, or if you're an artist who needs to sit down in couples therapy with their own wrist tendons. Number 12, The Boy and the Heron. I just got done the segment on it, I'm not reiterating what I said. Number 11, Ponyo. Ponyo doesn't take a lot of risks, but that just means it doesn't have far to fall. A story about friendship and or love is a tried and true formula, and unless you're a stuck-up little shit who cries when they see a G rating, this is going to rank pretty high. Number 10, Porco Rosso. That'll do, pig. That'll do. Number 9, The Secret World of Arietty. When I was very little, I actually saw The Borrower's film. And let me tell you, this film is way better than that film and the book. It's actually playing in IMAX theaters this month, and I'm going to go and see it. Number 8, The Cat Returns. This movie is so fucking funny. Oh my god, you need to watch it. Number 7, Spirited Away. When I watched this for the video, I got nervous because if it wasn't at least in the top 10, I was in for a lot of nasty letters. Probably still will since it's not number 1, but it's great and one of the few Ghibli films I feel compelled to watch again. Number 6, Whisper of the Heart. Another second act save like When Marnie Was There, a story about feeling adrift in life and second-guessing yourself at every turn. Wonderful, wonderful film, and I hope Ghibli makes another one like it before they close their doors. Number 5, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind. This is my favorite post-apocalypse film, and probably the best metaphor for climate change ever seen, because it really hammers home how climate change will affect us and only us. The Earth itself will be fine, and in a few million years we will be back to hosting advanced life, but we will forever be a memory. Number 4, From Up on Poppy Hill. While likely an odd choice for number 4, I keep coming back to From Up on Poppy Hill for its raw emotional sincerity and the sheer personal weight of its story. I was on the edge of my seat for poor Umi and Shun, and when they finally got their anxieties relieved, I felt like I'd just come down from an intense adrenaline high. Number 3, Grave of the Fireflies. Grave of the Fireflies pulls no punches in what it wants to be about. I didn't mention it in the segment, but it's based off the memoirs of a war survivor dealing with the grief of causing the death of his little sister through his own pride, which is reflected in the film through how much Seta is painted as the architect of his own downfall, with the film adding in a lot of Takahata's views on how it was not only Seta that failed and suffered from the same fatal pride. Number 2, Only Yesterday. Few are the films that make me cry, fewer still are the films that make me reflect on life when I otherwise don't want to. Only Yesterday did that in droves, to the point that watching it again for the video took 11 hours, as I kept having to pause it and just sit there thinking about life. This film actually convinced me to go back to therapy, as I realized I was still very clearly not over the the worst 5 years of my life. Number 1, The Tale of Princess Kaguya. Takahata's films are often about societal expectations versus personal happiness, and nowhere is that more evident than in Princess Kaguya, where the cost of sacrificing your happiness for what is expected of you is brought to its natural conclusion, as those expectations quite literally choke the life out of their victim. I said it in the segment and it bears repeating. The Tale of Princess Kaguya is the best animated film ever made. It has no equal. I'm CD Call. Thanks for watching.